with a sketch of your background.
Okay.
How it is that you both kind of your educational background, but more importantly, what's driving you? How did you come to this?
Okay.
What kind of lenses are you looking through?
Okay. I grew up in Detroit and did not like school very much. And one of the ways that I escaped from school was doing a lot of reading. And I mean that both metaphorically escape and also for real. In school, I often spent a lot of my time reading books that I'd smuggled in rather than doing my schoolwork. And eventually I dropped out of high school out of boredom and out of, just sort of a sense of if I was going to sit there all day reading, I might as well do that someplace more comfortable than in a hard school desk. And so I eventually just left. I then went back to school at some point, went back to college and never finished high school and was actually sort of set for a career in government. I was going to have a political life, and I had worked on a number of local campaigns in Michigan, senatorial campaigns, congressional campaigns. Got to know a fellow by the name of Robert F. Kennedy on one of those campaigns, and did some work for him down on his last campaign, which was my last campaign, in fact. I ended up going back to school, went to a university just outside of Detroit, Oakland University, where to do some community service, I decided there was a chance to do some work in the inner city, happened to be tutoring. And so I was only 18 or 19 years old, but I started tutoring inner city kids, found out, well, people reacted to it like I was doing a good job, and I wondered what they meant. And so I took a class in reading education, and I've been in the field ever since. So I got kind of sucked in trying to do something in my community, and ended up with a career that I never expected.
So you could really feel the difference that you're making in people's lives by working directly with people that had other disadvantages and that were struggling with them.
Absolutely, and that was exactly why I had gone into it in the first place, because of my own love for it and my own interest in doing something in my community. Then ended up with a bit of a professional interest in it, which I got a degree in elementary education and went off and taught first grade, and then started working on graduate degrees at night at first so that I could continue to teach. That was, I thought, an important part of my learning and my development, and I still do. I think that's really a big part of how I approach it now is from the kids that I worked with and what I saw in the communities I worked in.
So you see your ground is in the experience of people and the transformation of their lives, not just in the theoretical piece.
Absolutely. I mean, that came second for me, and it ended up being really important, and it became a kind of a driving passion for me as well. But it's always doing that towards making things better for kids, adults, people who are trying to learn to read. In fact, a lot of the debates now seem to be sort of, on the one side, people arguing for raising literacy achievement and not necessarily caring very much how, just wanting it done and maybe riding a little roughshod over the profession. And people who are kind of protecting the profession and saying, hey, you're being tough on us. I can see both sides, but because of my background, I tend to come down on the learner's side, on the student side in those debates because of that, I believe. So, yeah, it really does explain a lot about my positions and interests. I do.
You're doing fine.
That tie
It's got a little swirl.
Nobody's going to know who I am unless that tie is crooked.
I know, it's just my pickiness. Okay.
Maybe it's my head that's crooked. The tie is perfect.
So I really appreciate that background, and I think it's so important to have people that are not stuck in one of these threads. That can kind of step back and care first and foremost about the children, about the people, and secondly about all of the politics and machinations and theoretical arguments and everything else that's going on.
It's all got to be secondary.
That's why I was so delighted to hear of your election.
Well, it'll be an interesting time. I just spent the morning going through a bunch of materials that they'd sent me, and they all stress the goal as the sort of, professional improvement, which to me is not the goal. It's strictly a strategy. It's a good strategy, but it's a strategy. The goal is higher literacy, improved literacy worldwide. That's what my professional life has to be dedicated to. That's, I think, what the professional organizations that I belong to should be dedicated to something quite similar. And I've got 3 years to try to make that happen, I guess. And I'm going to try.
Well, there's quite a contrast between you and your predecessor there.
But I mean, he falls, very much on that, it's more important to protect our professional autonomy than it is to succeed in those other goals. And I appreciate that and I respect that. I think it's a mistake. I think if you talk to most teachers, the reason they went into this field is because they wanted to reach out to kids. And the notion of somehow protecting ourselves over that is not necessarily the right way to go. I think the best protection for us really is success.
Do what you're there to do.
Yeah.
Well, that'll protect you.
Absolutely. And so that's my strategy.
Otherwise you drift into the camp of, a union.
Absolutely. And I do think that's sort of where it's gone in a lot of ways in terms of the professional debate. It is this sort of union debate of, whose side are you on? And that's really not what this is about. It's not what it should be about.
That's a distraction from serving who you're here to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about you've conducted research, you've created an institute of sorts here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about your angle of view, what you've been trying to discover and learn your way into as the fulcrum of how it is that you contribute.
Sure. After I got my PhD, I had always assumed I was going to go back to the school district and be a curriculum director or something like that, stay with my sort of service role. But I got sucked in by the research. I really liked it. I think research is really wonderful. It's a great way to learn things, and I got interested in a number of questions. One basic question I was interested in was the teaching of writing and how that helps kids learn to read. A lot of the discussion at that time had been strictly on what do you need to do to help kids read, and the writing part of literacy was being omitted. As I found out, reading and writing share an awful lot of knowledge, whether we're talking at very basic levels in terms of the alphabetic code. You have to see it from the opposite side, but seeing it from the opposite side actually can give you insights that are useful in your learning. And so I was interested in those kinds of problems, and I studied that for a while. Got interested in family literacy, how we could help parents do a better job of preparing their kids for going to school and for doing well in school. And that work especially took place with immigrant families here in the city of Chicago. And so I was doing a pretty wide range of research on those kinds of issues and on assessment and so on. And then I got the opportunity to set up the Center for Literacy at the University of Illinois at Chicago. The idea was that this was going to be a unique center, and I think it is. Most university centers are really set up specifically to do research. That is their bread and butter. That's all they do. They look for external monies. They conduct studies. Everyone associated with the center is a researcher of some kind or other. The notion of this center was quite different. It was meant to be more of an outreach center. It was meant to give back more to the community than it took. We would do research, but we would do research in the context of delivering high quality programs to the community. And so we started doing programs in everything from school improvement to workplace literacy, to family literacy, document design, helping mainly the health and the legal professions, but other groups as well, to design documents that larger numbers of people could actually read and make sense of, so that literacy wouldn't be a way of blocking access to people in their participation in the society. And the center's actually been quite successful. We are, I think, in our 13th year and growing. And this stage, we're responsible for all parent education for Head Start in the city of Chicago. At one point, I had taken over as director of reading for the Chicago Public Schools and had set up their directions and trained an awful lot of people, hired an awful lot of people. Saw some pretty big achievement gains in the Chicago schools as a result of that. So, we've had our hand in an awful lot of stuff, whether it's medical, political, legal, economic. We've tied into all of it, and I think that's been really exciting. And I think it's, again, if you're interested in where I come from, I really think that working in business, working in law, working in medicine, and so on, it really is absolutely imperative to understanding literacy problems and what we need to do with kids, and even just understanding why it's so important. I mean, it isn't strictly a case of it tells you how to deal with the problem. It just keeps the problem really in your face. One of the things I'd been asked to do, in fact, by one of the newspapers, was to go to examine the ballots in Florida after the 2000 election. Because even though all the press talk at the time had been about issues of the machines and whether there were hanging chads and all that kind of thing, one of the things that the Florida newspapers got interested in was they had lost an awful lot of ballots in communities that didn't use machines. There were paper ballots. And so what they asked me to do was to analyze the ballots and see if I could predict the mistakes that were made by the voters that would have invalidated their ballots. And I was actually able to do it with a pretty high degree of accuracy. One of the things that came out of that is it was pretty clear that Florida had actually lost more ballots due to literacy problems than they lost to machine problems. That matters. That matters big time. And in fact, my understanding is Florida has been redesigning the ballots and have actually followed a lot of the kinds of things that I had pointed out as being concerns that people lower in literacy were likely to have trouble with. I feel pretty good about that.
That's great. That's really great.
Gives you an example of some of the kinds of work we do.
I appreciate the way that even in the center, what you're describing is that rather than being research, it's a practice. You're in practice. You're
Absolutely
actually learning how to make a difference and gathering all kinds of feedback from that on all these different social and individual dimensions to inform how you're doing it better. And
Absolutely.
It's a heuristical loop right in the core of its design.
Yes, absolutely. That was the whole idea of it.
Yeah, that's great. I so appreciate that. So you spoke, and by the way, the piece on literacy in Florida, that's one of the jewels. That's kind of one of the jewels.
Oh, it's thrilling.
People did not realize
That was thrilling.
the dimensions, the implications of this.
When they sent this stuff to me, I thought, well, what am I going to be able to figure out? But the fact was that there were just a lot of very clear design problems in the text that were going to throw people and that were going to lead to certain kinds of mistakes. I could not only tell them that there'd be a mistake in a certain part of the ballot, I could tell them what the mistake would be, and they'd go back and look and say, yeah, look, we lost 13,000 ballots in that county because of that. So they were able to trace it back, and I thought they did it very nicely. Instead of going and looking first and then telling me what it was and seeing if I could figure it out, they actually had me look at the ballot and tell them what problems I thought there were, and I thought that was really pretty important. Right now, I've just got done working on a case. There's a case in court here in Illinois where the Center for Poverty Law has taken the state of Illinois to court because essentially the contention is that they're not providing the medical care to poor children that they're supposed to. And a big part of the way that they put information out to the parents in the community is through that free services are available, like for checkups for your children and so on, is all through writing. And it's written at very high levels of literacy, so that if you don't have a pretty good education, you probably are going to have trouble understanding this material. Even though, most poor people, a very large percentage of poor people tend to be low in education. And so I just got done testifying in U.S. court on laying out what were the problems with the communications and how it was blocking these families from getting the services that they need. Something like 60% of poor children don't get medical exams, even though they're allowed to have them for free. I mean, it's it's absolutely a tragedy. So, yeah, this work allows us to get into lots of different angles of these problems, and I find it thrilling. I love coming to work.
That's one of the most amazing things that, when there's so much pushback on the relevance or importance or reliability of NAEP or the National Adult Literacy Surveys, and yet there's so much information coming in separately in parallel, things like we're describing now, or the American Medical Association's research indicating that, in addition to the clear $72 billion that they say is being lost because people aren't reading the prescription and following the doctor's instructions, I'd like you to speak to that as much as you can.
Sure.
That over and above that, that health itself and longevity itself, and a significant part of the medical expense of the country is associated with people not taking care of themselves in ways that there's all kinds of information out there to help them with, but that their literacy prohibits their access to.
We're doing some research locally on some of those issues through the center here. We've got a partnership with our medical school, specifically looking at what role literacy plays in unnecessary hospitalization. That people either fail to get care that they need to have, or they don't follow the care instructions that they need, and therefore aren't able to, and therefore they end up in the hospital unnecessarily. It's a very large percentage. It's something like 40% of hospitalizations are unnecessary and tend to be with low literacy people that really could have been prevented with better information or higher literacy. Obviously, I work on both ends of this. Let's keep the information accessible for the largest number of people. Let's make sure the largest number of people have the highest levels of literacy, so that the society really allows full participation. So what we're really working on now is we're trying to come up with a system that would allow doctors to easily and inexpensively determine which of their patients are going to need some literacy support to follow the care. And then, because things like the prescriptions that you get, say, through a VA hospital or whatever, that's all computerized now. You could actually have different kinds of instructions coming out for people with different levels of education. And so that's again another one of these programs and efforts that I'm pretty passionate about. I get pretty excited about it. So literacy. Here we are. This is 2004, and the U.S. Supreme Court said literacy should not be a block to voting in the 1960s, and here we are in 2004, and it still is. I think we certainly have. There are very few people who are totally illiterate in the United States, but when it comes to levels of literacy that don't allow them full participation, what you find is large numbers of people who can't meet their own health needs or can't meet the health needs of their children simply because they can't read the information that they need. People who cannot take part economically in the kinds of jobs that are available in the United States. One of the things I've had the opportunity to do over the last decade or so is to go and examine a lot of workplaces and to interview people from different lines of work. And one of the things that really stands out is that almost every job I have found has raised their literacy, their education standards somehow over the last decade or so. You go down to a mill in North Carolina where it used to be that people were, it didn't matter if they had an education level. If they were willing to come to work and put in a full day, they were fine. That isn't true anymore, because to stay in business, those sewing mills no longer can do simple clothes construction. That's done elsewhere. That's done where labor is less expensive. But if you want to buy an embroidered sweater or a shirt or jacket or whatever, they do that kind of work. But it involves reading computer codes and interacting with electronics. You want to be a truck driver? Well, it used to be no big deal. As long as they had strong arms and could move an 18-wheeler, took training to drive a truck and knew your directions, you were going to be fine. It's not true anymore. Now, if you don't have at least an 8th grade reading level, you can't read the terminal up in your truck cab because, frankly, you have to do all the work that middle management used to do in terms of dealing with inventory, dealing with service, dealing with all kinds of things that really require reading, math ability. It's hard to find any place in this society that doesn't require that kind of knowledge, or the work doesn't pay. The work isn't enough to support yourself or support a family. That wasn't true 20 years ago. That wasn't true 30 years ago. It is true now. I think it's true probably in every sector of this society. So knowing those kinds of things really suggests that we need to aim our efforts both to improve literacy, but also in some ways to make sure that the kinds of literacy that we teach really match up with what kids are going to confront as they move out into society.
Excellent. Just to go back for a moment, you touched on the literacy-democracy connection.
Mm-hmm.
I may be wrong. I don't really mean to bring politics in too much into this conversation because it's not as important to me. But it would seem to me that in a way you could say that this literacy made the difference in this last presidential election.
It certainly did in Florida. In a lot of states, you lose ballots. Heck, we lose same percentage of ballots here in Cook County that they lost in Florida. The difference is the election wasn't as close here, so it didn't make that big a difference. What it does mean is that if you're poor, your vote is less likely to be counted if you vote. You're less likely to vote in the first place. In fact, you're less likely to even know anything about the issues. The National Adult Literacy Survey found that not only couldn't adults read the kinds of campaign materials that are written and the kinds of newspaper articles that may give you insights about a campaign, but illiteracy is self-isolating. People pull back from the society. We're not quite sure why. It might just be simple embarrassment. But for whatever reason, somebody who's low in literacy is less likely to listen to the news on the radio or to watch it on television. And so they're going to be less likely to get information about government, politics, health. They cut themselves off from that as a result, we believe, of being low in literacy.
Yeah, I want to actually deconstruct this as we go on. I'll give you a little snapshot of my sense of this is that from the angles of view that I have, which is that people are becoming preconsciously shame-averse to the feel of confusion.
Yeah.
That in the learning to read thing, it's overwhelmingly confusing. They feel bad about how they feel in relation to it, and that the more that they experience that, the more that they start to avoid confusion. That generalizes, it decapitates learning.
Oh, I agree, and we do have some case studies out of, say, adults who are low in literacy, and I think some of the ones that have been really interesting. There's some work done at University of Pennsylvania where they found men who had come into a literacy program, and they wanted to know what they meant because a lot of these guys had actually participated in work and were doing okay by most sort of outside measures, but they were unhappy about their literacy levels. And so they interviewed them, and one of the things they found out is that they had not done well in the literacy in school. And so they've always, even though their literacy level wasn't necessarily that low, their perception was that they weren't very good at doing things like sitting in a circle with the teacher, reading a story and understanding it. These guys would read the technical stuff at work or a newspaper article and to heck with it. And so even if they had gained some shame in how they learned to read and didn't feel like they quite measured up, they actually were carrying that with them. Well, now imagine somebody who really didn't learn to read or didn't learn to read very well, couldn't read well enough, say, to keep a job or to get a job, couldn't read well enough to get on the right bus going to work. And how many times does a guy have to get on the wrong bus and be told, get out of here, stupid, this isn't where you're supposed to be going, before he says, I think tomorrow I'll sleep in. I just think that there are a lot of those kinds of things that have been documented in literacy that do suggest that being low in literacy is somehow perceived as shameful, which is horrendous, because lots of times people are low in literacy. Well, there's a very small number, but there are some who are low in literacy because of problems with learning, that their brains don't work right in terms of being able to process code and so on. There are certainly a much larger percentage of people who are low in literacy because we haven't done a very good job in the schools. Those of us who teach and administer and train teachers and write school books and all that just haven't measured up, haven't done the job as well as we need to. And these folks walk around the rest of their lives feeling like somehow they've failed, somehow they've done something shameful, somehow they have something in their life that they'd better keep quiet because it's going to be embarrassing or hurtful, when it wasn't necessarily their fault at all. They could have learned with better instruction, better support. Tough one.
The instructional casualty. In a conversation with Sally Shaywitz, I was confused because of the 20% dyslexia attribution she makes,
Mm-hmm.
and the 5 to 6%. Only 5 to 6% are learning disabled for neurobiological reasons that Reed and Wendorf and others make. It's really clear that even our estimate that 95% could read
Mm-hmm.
isn't based on bottoms-up neurobiological information.
No.
We're backing into it about how many we're able to reach when we do try.
Absolutely. That is
So
exactly.
the number could be much, much greater.
The numbers of folks who have been labeled disabled and that we estimate on disability have ranged as low as 1% to 2% and as high as 40%. I think that if you're in the bottom 20 to 25% for whatever reason, whether it's bad teaching, lack of access, some kind of a real learning problem, maybe you're just a little slower than other folks. I mean, there were some studies done a while ago, and I think a lot of people forget these, that if you have a problem, it probably doesn't block you from learning to read. If you have several problems, it probably does. And so if I'm partially sighted, I can still probably learn to read. If I'm partially sighted and have possibly really bad teaching for a few years, I'm probably in trouble. If I have some kind of an endocrine imbalance as a child, it might throw me off, but it probably won't block my literacy. If my mom doesn't get me to school, more than 60 or 70 days a year, it probably does. I think that that's probably true of a lot of these, that the percentage of people who probably have learning problems or potential for learning problems is probably, somewhat higher than we think, but they only become serious problems if you're put into a situation where you're less likely to learn. Or if you have multiple problems, here's a kid who hasn't had much support at home, now he's going to a school that isn't great, and he has a learning problem. He's probably not going to learn to read. A youngster with a learning problem in a supportive home, in a supportive school, we might never notice that he had a learning problem. He'll slip through because he's doing okay. He's doing okay because everything is supporting him doing okay.
Been a really interesting conversation with a cognitive anthropologist, Terence Deacon, who wrote the book Symbolic Species, which is really about the coevolution of language in the brain. The brain just didn't evolve independent of language, that this last major step in the evolution of the human brain
was due to it.
Was in large part due to language. Language is a environment. And that children with half a brain, literally, physically, by the way, it's a very interesting word.
Oh, yeah.
Literally half a brain can learn to speak.
Absolutely.
We've got so much internal infrastructure, wiring, instinctual, pathways that unfold to figure out a way to do that in the brain, that we're going to learn to speak on just about anything. But in the case of reading,
it's not as
it's a precarious add-on.
It's clear. Yeah, I was going to say it is an add-on. It's clearly higher up in the brain. It's farther away from the brain stem. Certainly more in that gray matter at the top. And it is, you can disrupt it, but very much, I think the same thing that what you were just describing with the learning language with half a brain, but I can block that. And it's easier to block that in that situation than it is if somebody has an intact brain. And I think it's probably the same way with the kinds of learning problems that affect the learning of literacy, that if for whatever reason, my wiring just isn't set up much for that, that's one possibility. Another possibility is, well, my wiring is just fine, but in the first several years of life, maybe I haven't had the right kinds of stimulation that would allow those synapses to be made and so on. I mean, that's all possible as well. And so that when I walk into school, if I'm suffering from multiple problems, the chances that you're going to catch it and help me are probably a lot lower. And so, it could be that something like learning disabilities are fairly evenly distributed across a society. But when it comes to the amount of support we're going to give to children in a neighborhood, that's going to differ by how much money your parents have, by what resources are available in your community, and so on. And so I overcome my learning problem in my community. It's too bad you don't overcome it in your community. You've got a lack of support there. It'd be nice to be in a position where, for most kids, we would never even notice that they had a learning problem, simply because our instruction was good enough to make all or most of them succeed. Right now, we're not accomplishing that, of course.
I don't know if you saw this on the article that we did, but one of the things that we're wanting to put together is a kind of composite picture that shows the life risk factors of childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of stacks them together so you can see them side by side. I don't think people get this. If you put all of the different things that are physical genetic disorders that a child might be at risk for, all of the physical abuse, according to all the stats we've got.
Sure.
All of the brain or mental disorders that are neurobiological.
Mm-hmm.
And you stack all these things together, they don't come anywhere near
No.
the risk factor that children have for having their lives distorted because they didn't learn to read well.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. It's if you are low in literacy, you get cut off from so many possibilities. It changes the extracurricular activities that you're going to select as a child. It alters the relationships you're going to have with the adults around you. It is going to certainly affect what you're able to learn and how well you would do on something like a college entrance exam. It is going to affect, initially oral language is affecting literacy, but eventually literacy is affecting oral language. It's going to affect how well you would do in an interview, how you're going to come across to other people. It's certainly going to affect how you feel about yourself. It will likely affect who you want to congregate with in terms of your peer choices. And so if you take the risks of other kinds of damage, versus this, you can show that they're different. But I think you're going to also find that the risks of some of those other kinds of damage during childhood, some of those come actually from being low in literacy. You're probably more likely to be out in a car, drinking with your friends at 15 or 16, if you're low in literacy than if you're higher in literacy. There are certainly lots of people who are low in literacy who don't get involved in delinquency. But when we look at prison and juvenile detention facilities, it's something like 85% of the population there is low in literacy, versus, say, in the normal population of being 20%. That's a pretty big swing that suggests that there's a connection. I don't think it's as simple as, well, I'm low in literacy, I'm going to go commit a crime, or everybody who is low in literacy would do it. It's nothing like that. We have no numbers that would suggest anything like that. But I do think you're a lot more likely to be in bad circumstances. You're a lot less likely to have a real future. And so, why wouldn't you get involved in drugs or alcohol or adolescent sex, or any number of things that put you at risk. Put you at risk in terms of health, put you at risk in terms of getting involved in the prison system, and so on. I think literacy in a lot of ways gives you a stake in society. As a kid, it's maybe the most visible picture you'll have of what's possible in your life and what might work for you. And of course, if it isn't working for you, you very well might wonder. And, under the unfortunate circumstances, you'll probably make some bad choices, or you'll often make some bad choices as a result of that, I'm afraid. So it gets to be very circular. All this stuff is very stitched in together. What are the chances of a kid getting AIDS? Fairly low. What are the chances of what's the difference in chances of a child low in literacy getting AIDS versus, well, it's actually much higher. What's
the chances of a child being literate?
And
all the consequences that go with it. If we just separate
absolutely.
two different issues, getting AIDS,
absolutely.
getting, again, some other kind
low
of
literacy is the big one. Yeah.
Low literacy, the risk for
Yep.
low literacy dwarfs everything else that
Yep.
we're able to put together.
Absolutely. But on all the other ones that the child's own behavior, say the adolescent's own behavior are going to matter, literacy is implicated in it. And so if they're low in literacy, you've even raised that other set of things.
I always go coincident with it. That leads to the connection. Clearly reading is much more than reading.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about access to information. We could say, yes, it's about vocabulary building, and by virtual vocabulary
Mm-hmm.
building, cognitive exercise, and all kinds of positive things that come from being literate that enables us to move in a different spaces in
Mm-hmm.
our educational opportunities and the friends and so forth that take us out of the more socially risky areas that
Mm-hmm.
we might inhabit if we can't read well. But there's something more to it. Something more about the relationship that somebody has with themselves that's
Mm-hmm.
connected to the social pathology.
I think so, and I think one of the reasons is because we've so stitched literacy into every other action in our life. I think that's a big piece here, is that literacy is obviously more than just reading or writing, is more than being able to sit and look at a book, because it is a symbol, because it is a social marker, because it is an issue of pride and personal connection and a whole range of things. I don't think that's just literacy per se. If we went out and created some new society, literacy could have some very different meanings. In our society, literacy is bound up in virtually everything we do. It's hard to imagine getting through a day without having to read. I have an assignment I give to my graduate students that I make them keep a diary for 2 weeks of everything that involves literacy that they do. And they, have to write down the time of the day and what it was and what the piece of material is. A lot of students can't finish the assignment. They can't get through the day. They can't drive in their car. They can't walk into a store. They can't do anything without being embedded in literacy and having to read or write for some reason or other. And they'll come back and curse me for having given such a terrible assignment. But it certainly makes it clear to them how just absolutely central to every aspect of their functioning. Every time they think that they've found some aspect of their life that isn't tied into it, all of a sudden it's, I'm reading this or I'm writing that, or I couldn't have done this part without that. A book was really important in that. The magazine needed to be, it just always. And so I think we've made it such both a rite of passage for a youngster in learning, but also a way of tying into, you want to go play softball? You better know something about reading, because we're going to give you information about the softball team and that. You're going to have to fill out the medical form allowing you to play on that, on and on and on. It's all connected in. And again, that goes back to that National Adult Literacy Survey. Nobody is surprised that lower literate people are less likely to be involved in a professional organization. You're not going to be a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher if you're low in literacy. No one's surprised by that. Maybe they're not surprised that you're less likely to take part in government, for the same reason. But they find that if you're low in literacy, you're less likely to be able to take part in your church. They find that if you're low in literacy, you're less likely to take part in things like athletic activities in your community. You're cut off. There's just nothing that it doesn't cut you off from. So, of course, you want to be literate. It's not just an issue of, oh, I've got to get over this hurdle and then everything's going to be fine. It's this is a ticket to participate in. On the other hand, if you're not participating and if you don't have information coming into the system, if you're not learning about the world, it's awfully hard to read, because reading involves making sense of things, and you need other information to make sense of things. A lot of our vocabulary comes from television, comes from talking to our friends, comes from listening to our parents, comes from, playing word games in the crib and in the back seat when you're driving with mom, and so on and so forth. And that language is part of the fuel that makes literacy go. And so literacy both feeds that, but it also draws on it. And so it's a circle. With literacy being a big part of that circle. It's not just a little piece of it.
In a conversation with Keith Stanovich, they did some studies on the frequency of the occurrence of certain kinds of words in different venues that people commonly experience: television, movies, TV guide, newspapers, magazines, and so forth, and found out that there really is this barrier that almost 70 or 80% of our common shared vocabulary comes through reading, not through the kind of language that we see on the movies, or that we see on television, or that we listen to on the street corner. That the language that is the kind of language used outside the range of poverty, that's used complexly in business and organizations, in the field of successful people, is acquired reading.
Oh, absolutely. There are older studies that looked at vocabulary development, and they tended to find that the whole time kids were in school, they're learning something like about 1,000 or 1,500 words a year, so that by the time a youngster leaves high school, he probably knows something like 20,000 words on average. And there are people who now say, oh, it's higher than that or whatever. But these studies tended to follow kids, and they said, if you went on to college, if you kept in that reading environment, you tended to continue to add 1,000 or 2,000 words a year as you continued with that, whereas for other folks it kind of tapered off and slowed down. And I think it really suggests to you that if you're in a reading environment, and a lot of workplaces these days have become reading environments, I think what happens is that, your language learning goes on. My hunch is if we went back to the 1950s, we'd find that for a lot of people, once they left school, their language growth really did probably either slow down or maybe even come close to stopping, unless they stayed in the education setting. I don't think that's true anymore. I'd be very surprised if folks went back and did those same kinds of analyses. I think they would find that workplaces are now such learning environments, and that it's very rare that an employer has somebody doing the same job day in and day out, that things are constantly changing and new information's coming in and people have to be retrained so often and so on. But I bet that learning continues even if you're not in school, even if you're in a workplace environment, for exactly the reason that someone like Keith Stanovich would be finding those kinds of things and saying those kinds of things.
It's interesting that when you actually study the emergence of Standard English, John Fisher's work, and which John Fisher's the expert on the Chancery scribes that Mineski refers to, the foundation of some of the things that he puts forth. And I was really clear that the English language, the vocabulary that allowed English to go from being a peasant language to a functional language, was all imported from the written vocabulary from other parts of the world.
Absolutely.
That even the spoken language we have has been built from literacy.
Well, you get a very, very thin veneer of Anglo-Saxon words for saying the most basic things that seem to be the basis of English, but then very quickly there's this overlay of Latin and Greek that goes across that, and now I mean, we draw out of pretty much every language in the world. There are so many immigrants
and French.
Oh.
Because the England was ruled by the French
Absolutely.
for a couple hundred years before literacy began under Henry V.
Mm-hmm.
Much of the language of commerce and business and
Oh, absolutely.
higher society was French. That's all mixed in.
Absolutely. So yeah, you very quickly get into a language that was created by literacy. Without writing, we wouldn't have had a lot of the words that we use, and of course, we wouldn't probably have a lot of the mental experience that we have without those words. So it really is not only a life-changing, but a societally changing kind of phenomena. English is a very big language in terms of the number of words. I guess if you count words that are in dictionaries, English is the largest of any of the languages, and now that it's the language of science, and one would presume it's the fastest growing of our languages. That said, that probably means that there are more opportunities in this society than in any other society. Opportunities both in terms of what you can do and where you can go, but really what you can think about that aren't necessarily available in all languages or all cultures. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about being in a melting pot language. The French work hard to try to keep English and other languages out of theirs. In English, it seems like we go the other way. We work hard to bring in other languages within it. I think this is a better approach. I think it gives us more opportunity.
Except for the consequences that it represents to the people who struggle trying to get up into it.
Absolutely, and that's why a commitment to education is so critically important. Finding ways to make sure that as many people as possible can, not everybody's going to make the same amount of money, be in exactly the same kind of job, but the notion that everybody is going to be able to take part in just the most fundamental parts of our society, including thinking about what you want to think about, being able to pursue ideas and so on. I think that's just all really pretty important.
Let's pause for a second. You want to adjust something?
We've got 10 minutes until tape change. We're rolling.
Okay. Before we leave this, back to the connection. Clearly, literacy is important for all of these gateway enabling, necessary but insufficient, car keys into all these realms of modern cultural existence. But on the downside, kind of what we touched on earlier, is for people that shame out in the struggle.
Sure.
I talk to children who say reading's not important. Who say I'm not very smart. Who say I'm not a good reader. Who come up with self-definitions to escape the pain of the shame that is now linked in with this confusion they can't handle in learning to read.
Absolutely.
And it's that self-identification learning that seems to create this, what we want to get at, we think is connected to, it's not just this cognitive model further downstream, this ideational thing. It's like this pre-processing bias to avoid things that are confusing because they feel bad. I feel bad about myself for being confused.
Exactly. Yeah, this is about mystery. I mean, if you think about it that way, it seems mysterious, not just to children, often to teachers and parents, why somebody isn't learning to read. It seems just, I'm teaching this class, I'm doing everything I've done with everybody else. These kids are learning, this one isn't. I don't understand what to do. I don't understand why it's happening. The youngster who's not learning, of course, is looking and going, it's mysterious to me too. It must be me. There just must be something wrong with me because, I was sitting at the same table with 3 other kids and they were learning it. It must be me. There's something wrong here. We often think of science as giving you some kind of a technology. We'll have a new method of teaching. We'll have a new machine that'll fix something. We'll be able to, enter somebody's brain and, do something. But think of science as not just giving you these technologies, though that's certainly an important outcome, they give us understanding. They give us ways to see through the mystery. Certainly, I think what our research on reading has done in the last 20 years, 30 years, has really explained to a lot of us what's going on. And increasingly, I think you're going to see those explanations of how this process works, how learning to read takes place, what it is that you have to master, and so on, make it seem less amorphous, make it seem less confusing. I think we're going to get better at explaining the results of these studies so that a teacher, a parent, and even the youngest child is going to be able to say, oh, I get what's going on. I can see that this isn't something wrong that I've done. And in fact, that there are things that we can do individually ourselves in trying to learn, that we can do as teachers in trying to teach somebody, that we can do as parents in trying to make sure our kids succeed. So I think that the knowledge that's coming out of science is in some ways a demystifier. But that isn't just something for the priests of reading to have so that they can come up with better nostrums and elixirs to solve our literacy problem. It actually is something that allows the practitioner to understand better what they're seeing. It allows the person, the parent, to understand better what's going on in their environment, which means that learners are probably over time going to get better at participating in their own learning in this. I think you're going to see schools and teachers improving in how they respond to kids. I'm always surprised and amazed when I go out and I talk to in a year thousands of teachers, and I'll go and talk to a group of teachers and have teachers tell me that maybe for the first time that they, listening to what I had to say, that they were understanding what they had to do in teaching and reading. And these are people who've been teaching for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, who've taken classes. The confusion and the lack of clarity is there too. It's not just the youngster who's sitting there going, something funny is going on here. The teachers are often saying that, but they don't know what to do. I've been a teacher. I know what that feels like. Usually, different teachers respond to it in different ways. I used to just try to ignore it as much as possible and not be bothered by it. But certainly there are teachers who are eaten up by that, and they see this youngster who isn't making it. I could satisfy myself that most of them were getting it. There are a lot of teachers who can't satisfy themselves with that, and it troubles them. Certainly the individuals are always bothered by it. The kids are always bothered by it. And so they're frustrated and they're afraid of it, and they do all kinds of things, deciding that they're stupid, deciding that school is stupid. There are different ways of responding to the same problem, but I think it's the confusion. I think it's the mystery. And I think one of the things that we need research to do is to help clarify those mysteries and not to just leave them as open questions.
Good. Let's stop here and change tapes. I want to start something now that's going to take Tedeschi and Lionel. One of the things that I push on is that we're so adultopomorphic. We look at what's going on through the lenses of our amassed knowledge, which is on the other side of this whole literacy thing, with the way that we've come to describe it. And that there's a big difference between that structure of knowledge and thinking and the lenses that we construct with them, and the experience of the child who's coming through this gauntlet. And it's deep in the experience of the child that I want to go back to this last question that we touched on, which is my sense as we piece together the emotional science with the cognitive science with the other pieces that start to flow together here, is that faster than we're conscious of, this reading needs to function. We're talking Keith Rayner, we're talking like 25, 30 milliseconds makes the difference. It's incredible speed.
Absolutely.
And yet, at another level, we know that the cognitive processes depend on our affect. Affect's what focuses what cognitive processes are doing. Right. And that if the affect system turbulates, if we become more and more prone to shame, for example, then such that at that speed level, we start to go into the kind of biological precursor of what would be Kami-Shame. That's creating this cognitive disruption. So that the emotional piece isn't just a summary downstream after the effect, after the fact. It's fundamentally involved in the core process of processing all of this.
Well, it's. I think one of the ways that the motivational aspects of literacy learning, get tied in. Obviously, there's the outcome of failure, but there's also, if the instruction isn't engaging, I'm not going to pay that much attention. I'm not going to spend as much time. I'm not going to do the rehearsals in my head that are required to make the words stick. I have a heck of a time remembering names. If I remember when I meet somebody to say their name again and again for a few minutes, I can hold it. But if you're just meeting somebody, maybe you're meeting several people, it's hard to do that. You're distracted. You've got other things going on, and so instruction really has to kind of strip away the distraction and get you focused on what you need to do, and make you do it in a way that guide you to do it in a way that'll allow you to really stay with it and succeed. What it takes, the differences between success and failure are often fairly small, but they really require a lot of engaged attention. And if the teacher isn't able to pull in that engaged attention from her students, then their willingness to be distracted, their ability to think that maybe this isn't so important, they can go think about something else right now, is really going to block the best of efforts. And that's one of the reasons, in fact, why people get concerned about blaming teachers or blaming schools for failure, because obviously the individual plays some role in it. If they don't engage, if they don't pay attention, your best teaching efforts can fail. Of course, your best teaching efforts have to try to get them over that hump, and so it's a constant negotiation, it seems to me.
But we're talking about something that's got to happen faster than the volition of the individual.
Sure.
It's more complex,
right,
quicker. And if at that level, children develop a feeling aversion to the confusion,
they're not going to engage. They're not going to engage.
It's going to make the cognitive challenge, which is already borderline, right? All the worse. So that what I'm trying to get to,
sure,
to whatever level you're comfortable with, is that this emotional piece isn't just a "wouldn't it be nice, poor Johnny feels bad." This is fundamental to the process of processing. We detox, we change the environment that children are learning in. They don't feel like they're not so quick to go to feel that there's something wrong with them because they're confused.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the best way to avoid, kids feeling confused is to actually have a fairly clear plan of attack, to know what it is that you're trying to teach, to be able to recognize whether kids are actually learning what it is that you're teaching, to pay attention to that. I'm not talking about a lot of testing or something like that. I'm talking about if I teach, let's say we take kindergarten kids and I'm teaching them their letters. If they don't know their letters yet, I'm teaching their letters. Being able to recognize whether the kid knows the letter P yet. Recognizing whether he can tell the P from the B. Because if he can't, you're going to slow yourself down later. You'd be better off taking the time now and staying with it. And I'm afraid what happens in a lot of cases, a teacher might not be sure that she's supposed to teach that, thinks she's supposed to teach it, but thinks she's really supposed to just move on pretty quickly, and therefore if 6 or 8 of the kids didn't get it, it'll be okay. Well, unfortunately, it probably won't be okay. And if we do that on a larger scale, and you say, yeah, but what about words, and what about letter sounds, and what about other aspects of learning to read? And I think what you're going to find is quite often the kids are being taught by teachers who aren't too sure what it is that's supposed to be accomplished. Even when they are sure of that, they're not necessarily certain of whether the kids are getting it. And even if they know that, they're not sure what to do about it if a youngster isn't, succeeding with what it is. The surest way to get confusion is to fail to teach something foundational, and then to go to the next thing and teach that imperfectly and just to continue on. You want a learner who's confused and not too sure what's supposed to be happening. Allow them not to learn stuff that's really important. And so I think we have to sort of rethink our system, especially in those early years, of making sure that the largest percentage of kids succeed that we possibly can succeed with. And right now, it's just, in far too many classrooms, it's hit or miss. The teacher gives the lesson. It's not necessarily explained very well to the kids of what the lesson's about or why they need to know it. There isn't much paying attention to following up on it to make sure that it's learned. And, the teacher can honestly say at the end of the term, I've taught everything I was supposed to, and the kids can honestly say, I don't get it, I don't know what's going on here, and be totally confused and lost in it. And so I think we really need to have it's really a different mindset in education. It's a mindset that's more about learning than about teaching. That it isn't our actions that are the important thing, it's the kids learning that matters most, and that we have to be willing to do pretty much whatever it takes to make that happen.
Yeah, generally I think the way that I phrase that in some of my own work is that our general operational assumption in education is that at any given second what we have to teach is more important than the quality of the learner's participation. That's fundamentally disorienting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The hard thing for a teacher is, when having worked a lot with young teachers and student teachers and so on, is young teachers certainly recognize that their experiences of childhood, whether it was their own experiences or observing their friends and siblings, our young teachers often have a better idea of how unmotivated kids are than those of us who've been at it for a while. But their alternative is so often not coming at it with the technical skills of teaching well, it's how can I entertain the kids? And of course that is just a different distraction. The trick is teaching in a way that allows kids to be engaged or that encourages kids to be engaged. It's not the either or. It's where the debates in the field are probably doing harm. It's, I either try to bring in books that are going to interest kids and talk about this in ways that are going to interest kids, or I should teach them the skills. Bad trade. That's a bad trade. It won't get you where you want to be. Oh, see that tie? My ties walk. I think it's a tie.
Great. I'm just moving this.
The tie. Oh, okay. Microphone is sliding. Hey.
Let's during our conversation, we got still a lot to cover, and I'm enjoying this so much. Thank you. In our conversation on the phone, you relayed some stories that were particularly powerful. I like to capture.
Okay. You have to remind me.
One was the mother who's busy ironing away as the children come in with their things to avoid exposing herself. The degree to which people hide this, and there was that vignette, and also the adult executive who had to be
smuggled in.
Okay.
Yeah, I've worked in a lot of different situations over the years in a lot of different places, but always with literacy and always in education settings. And one of them involved me in working with some adults who had learning problems. And this was somebody who, it was a parent in a school district, in fact, that I was working in. And she had two children, one of whom was in my class. I was a primary grade teacher, and the mother was seeking help. And what she was seeking help with was education. She had grown up in a part of the country that the schooling hadn't been quite what it was in where I was teaching, and she had been allowed to not attend very much school. She had, I believe, it was an auditory. She had some kind of a hearing problem as a child, and so they just thought she was stupid, and they didn't let her go to school. When she got to be about 12 or 13, some medical person figured out that this was some simple blockage that could be solved, and all of a sudden this woman was no longer hard of hearing or deaf or whatever, and was able to participate in school. And of course what they did is they threw her in like 9th grade, having hadn't, well, because that was her age, and so in a year or two she dropped out and never learned to read. And she had managed to keep it secret from her husband knew, but her 2 children did not. 2 or 3 children did not. She had come up with a bunch of strategies to protect the secret. One of the strategies was that when children would come home from school, she was always worried that they'd have notes from the teacher or things, schoolwork that the kids wanted to show her. And to avoid that, she always made sure she was busy. She'd be ironing or washing a floor or doing something that clearly was involving her. And then she would, if the kids came in and say, hey, look, I got a note from Mrs. Smith, or Mom, would you look at my math homework or whatever? She would say, well, I will, but I'm busy right now. Just set it down and I'll look at it later. And so it always gave her a way out. And then her husband could come home and read it and tell her, what it was about or whatever. And so that was her protection. That was one of the ways that she protected herself. The problem was the kids had gotten to an age, I think her youngest was in 3rd grade, and now she was worried that she wasn't going to be able to hide it much longer, and she was worried what they were going to think about her. And so she'd actually come to me to try to find out how to get help so that she could learn to read. Very sad, very, very sad story. But, in her case, the embarrassment was not just with the general public, it was with her own children.
I've read reports of the American Medical Association through pro-literacy of studies that show that there's a great percentage of people with literacy difficulties that only their spouse knows about it. Some that they may not their spouse.
Absolutely. Yeah. Quite often, I've rarely seen a case where the spouse or the significant other doesn't know. Unfortunately, in some cases, it becomes part of the relationship. And so, and that's true with parents and children as well. And so what you'll see is when the adult decides, I'm going to become literate, this is especially true when it's a woman, I'm going to become literate, the partner, and sometimes the kids feel threatened by that it's going to change our relationship. That, I used to do all that for you. If you're not going to need me to do that, that must mean you want out and you're abandoning me. And in some cases it leads to violence. In some cases it leads to other kinds of abuse, but it really does cause some disruptions. This is a really tricky thing. You encourage people to become literate because of the independence that it will give them. But in some cases they've evolved into relationships of dependency, where those other individuals don't want to give that control up. And so it threatens the codependency. It really does. Unfortunately, it's a tough thing to study. I know that there's some folks who are trying to do some research on that problem, but pretty much anyone who's worked much with adult literacy has seen that from time to time, but we don't know how prevalent it is, and we don't know really what to do about it. In some cases, it's just extremely difficult, and it's frustrating because you're not sure whether to encourage the person to stay with a program, for example, because it might be life-threatening to stay with it. On the other hand, it's awfully hard to tell somebody give in to that. So this is one where I really wish we knew more. I wish we had more research. It's a difficult problem. This other case that I had mentioned to you was. I was doing a seminar on literacy. It was really about the implications of literacy more than on how you teach it. It was for teachers, but it was about sort of how literacy is used in the society. And as one of the segments of this seminar, I was doing this in another part of the country, I'd asked, would they bring in some adults who were engaged in becoming literate, who were enrolled, say, in a local literacy program of some kind, or getting tutoring or something, and that would be willing to allow me to interview them in front of an audience of teachers, so that we could get at issues of what problems were in their life from literacy, why they'd come into a program, what it was changing for them, good or bad. And they'd found a fellow for me, but this person that they found, they explained to me there were going to be some problems with it because he wasn't the typical person, but his tutor really thought he'd be great. He was actually a very successful local businessman. He did a lot of contract work for the government, and so he had to be able to get government contracts and so on. He somebody who had virtually no literacy, but had managed to become quite successful because he had a business partner who knew his problem and was willing to do those parts of the work. And his wife knew the problem and was willing to sort of support him and help him with that part. He was very good with his hands. He could do all the physical work that was required. He could certainly handle the men and so on involved in these jobs, and so they were able to be quite successful. But his problem was that his fear that if people found out he was low in literacy, they'd stop getting the contracts. That no longer would the county and the state and the federal government trust that he'd be able to do the work. And so as they explained it to me, it had to be kept top secret that he was meeting this group of teachers and talking about this. And so we literally had to darken the windows and, lock the doors and stand guards at the doors and bring him into the place where this was taking place, for some other reason, and swear, had to explain it to all the people in the room and swear them to secrecy and so on and so forth. And he was so nervous. Going before them, his hands were just shaking, and you could see how wet they were, how frightened he was. And before the end of it, we all cried, but he cried too. It was a very heartrending moment, but it was just because of his fear of people knowing that he'd had literacy as a problem, and he'd shown incredible courage, not just in sharing with us, but seeking out help, finding a tutor who would be sensitive to his problem and to why it had to be secret, and who would not just teach him, but would teach him while protecting him. And I guess that's maybe all we all want from our teachers, is to be taught and protected. He just needed some special protection.
That's such a powerful story. Again, back to a point made by pro-literacy, I think it's so powerful. In the adult literacy research work they're doing, they're finding that for adults with low literacy, when they enter a supermarket, when they go into a store, their expectation, their consciousness is focused on how to get out of there without being discovered. Not
Right.
how to get the best deal, not how to get
Absolutely.
exactly what they want, but how to get out, how to get part of what they need. But even that's kind of like overshadowed by their hypervigilance at trying to get out of there undiscovered.
If you're the marketer, if you run a supermarket, you try to provide as many choices for people as you possibly. So you give 30,000 choices in a supermarket now, something like that. Huge number of choices. But there is a percentage of our society, because of their low literacy needs, who look at that and go, how do I avoid that? It's great that now there are 5 cake mixes. I liked it better when there was 1. It's terrific that my brand of detergent just changed everything about it, so it'll be better. But I can't find out about that because I can't read it and make sense of it. Now in the new box, I don't even necessarily know that it's my detergent. I'd like to pay with a check. I'd like to pay, this way or that way, but maybe I can't do that. In fact, this wasn't a student of mine, but in one of the programs I was in, an older woman, she was like in her 70s, who'd become literate just recently. And to her, the biggest thrill was getting to write a check. She was so illiterate, she didn't even know how to write her name, which is fairly rare in American society. But she was older. She'd not gone to school. She was an African-American woman. She was the oldest daughter in a very large family. I think they had like 9 children. She essentially raised her brothers and sisters. And so many of them went to school, but she wasn't able to. She was needed to take care of the others. And so she hadn't had schooling. And so she really was illiterate in its worst sense, in its most obvious sense. Learning to write a check at the market was the most thrilling thing. Her local TV station even came out and covered it because she was proud of it. This was something that, even though she was in her 70s, she had accomplished something in her life that really mattered to her, and so she was very proud of it. And it was, it was something that so many of us take for granted, that for her it was a rite of passage. It was a a connection to her society that she'd never had and she always wanted. I asked her, she said her family had spread all over the country. I asked her if she'd ever traveled to see them. She said she did. She'd take buses and trains to where they were. And I said, well, how do you do that? That just struck me as being amazing that, somebody must have helped her. She said, no. I'd go to the train station. You can call them on the telephone and you can ask about, whether they have a bus that goes to Baltimore or whatever. And I'd go out to the station and I would, go to the counter and buy a ticket. They'd, tell them what I wanted and they'd do it. So you could do that orally. And then I would sit and listen for the train, for them to announce it. And so that, she couldn't sit there and do something else because she had to be paying attention all the time. It wasn't like she could just read the ticket and read the sign and know, which platform or whatever. She had to wait for the announcements and didn't know when they'd come. And so she'd just have to be vigilant. And I think that it's that vigilance that you have to have if you don't have literacy, that you can't sort of switch attention when you're in a bus station or a train station or waiting for a plane. That the rest of us can do. You can't sit in a doctor's office and read a magazine to kill a few minutes so that you don't just sit there. There's so many little things that it cuts you off from that I think are just usually not recognized.
Thank you. That's really good. Let's go into the processing part. We've got this code, and part of what we're doing is telling the story of this code.
Sure.
The code's largely phonetic up until at least the trajectory on into us, until this amalgamation that happens in the 1400s in England, where a bunch of scribes to whom English wasn't their primary language, who were trained to speak and write in Latin, and had strong French influences, begin trying to transcribe this almost peasant oral language of English according to the sound conventions and so forth. And out of this beginning, and later complicated by the printing press and all this story,
and all the other languages coming in,
we end up with a system in which we have a insufficient number of representational elements, letters, to represent the sounds that are used in our oral language. Well, this is unlike the way the alphabet originally functioned.
Yes.
When the Greeks import it from the Phoenicians, they say, wait a minute, this doesn't have enough letters to deal with the sounds. We think it ought to have, letters to represent the vowels. And so they change it so that it catches up, syncs up with their oral language system. But when the time, because the Semitic language, phonemic structure of the Semitic language is different than the phonetic structure of the Greeks. But nobody's minding the store like that when it comes into England.
Right.
The people that care about language at all care about Latin and French. They don't care about English.
Absolutely.
This is only over 500 years ago. It's only been 10 or 20 generations since the printing press and King James and all of this have kicked, to a point where literacy's become a widespread concern in society. We've got a form of confusion between these letters and sounds, which the brain never dealt with in all of its evolutionary history. It's too fresh to have been adapted to in any way. It's an unnatural, artificial kind of confusion. And this is at the base of what children have to learn their way through. And we know that how dexterous they are in their oral language environment is really key. I make the analogy as like a player piano. Right? If they haven't made enough distinctions, they don't have enough keys. They can't play them fast enough, they can't play the chords. The code's got to work like the scroll, play the piano to create the sounds that get virtually heard or actually spoken that result in reading experience. An insufficient number of keys, an insufficient ability to play them fast enough, and the code can't engage the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got all this working against, making it difficult. Anywhere inside that space where you can speak to with comfort your sense of the unnaturalness of this challenge.
I think a lot of people, when they think of the sound system and the relationship between sounds and letters, whether they're prophonics or antiphonics, tend to take a notion of it somehow being a simple system. That if we just teach those letter sounds, it's going to be fine. Or the contrary. Teaching kids this reading thing is really about teaching these simple relationships, but English is a lot more complex than that, so this is useless, and we shouldn't be trying to teach kids the sounds. I mean, you can play it either way. It's the same idea, though, that somehow it's a simple system. It is not a simple system. It's a complex one. A simple system, a simple phonemic system, would have a letter for every sound, and it would consistently be the same letter for every sound, and we would make sure we spelled each of the sounds that you hear in language commonly, and everything would be fine, seemingly. There'd be problems, of course. Dialect problems is one obvious one. My mother was Canadian, so I say outside. Somebody comes from the part of the country I live in now, their mother maybe grew up here, they say outside. We'd spell those words differently. Over time, it'd be a very good possibility that in different parts of the land, we would actually not be able to read something written elsewhere, because standardized spelling makes absolutely no sense in a system that follows dialect. Of course, dialect changes over time. New people come into the society from other cultures. We get lazy in how we say particular words or how particular sounds get pronounced, and so you'll see a shifting in pronunciations, and all of a sudden we wouldn't be able to read things that had been written in the past. And so we actually have a fairly stable spelling system where it is standardized, and what that means is that the way we pronounce things is not always the simple, simply put the way that it's spelled, and so we have these funny words like of that. Of, by F. I don't hear F making V sounds very often, and it doesn't. In fact, it only does it in of. So we have things like that are in the language. We have fewer letters than we have sounds, and so that requires doubling up letters and having other letters serving as markers to tell you what sound a particular letter is supposed to have. There are all these complexities, but swimming in that sea of complexity, there are a few things that we need to remember. One of the things is our system, while it doesn't always preserve the way we pronounce things, it does tend to preserve meanings. And so meanings carry across words. A simple example, dogs and cats. The last sound, and in fact the plural meaning, the idea that there's more than one dog and more than one cat, is all summed up in that letter S at the end of those two words. The fact that we pronounce one Z and one S doesn't make any difference at all. And so anyone reading those words can look, and even if you couldn't read them, if you know the system could say, hey, it's more than one of these DOGs or more than one of these CATs, even if you couldn't pronounce it, even if you weren't too sure. So our system actually preserves meaning more than it preserves the sound. And I think that that's incredibly important, that even in its most basic aspect, even when we're teaching the phonics and the letters and so on, that we're actually into the meaning already, that it isn't a separable task. It isn't, we do word recognition and we do reading comprehension. It's all about comprehension. That's infused through the whole system. I think that's an important aspect of it that needs to be remembered. Another thing I think needs to be remembered is we all love the exceptions. We all love the odd spelling, or the odd, the word that doesn't quite work. We've borrowed a word like lingerie from the French, and boy, that has funny things that it does with those I's in that word lingerie. We don't do that in other English words. Well, of course we don't, because it's really a French word. We have those kinds of spellings, and we look at those and say, oh, look, English isn't consistent. When people have done, large-scale computerized analyses of the system, you find out that for the most part, it is consistent. And, depending on what body of words you look at, how many of the words you look at, it can range from about the high 80% to the high 90%. And so most of the language is actually pretty consistent. So, I used of as an example. It's absolutely true. The F doesn't do what you normally expect, but the O does. The O operates the way it does in many words and in many situations. The word that E at the end doesn't operate the way you'd expect it to, but the TH does. And so even in words that somehow violate a particular simple correspondence, there are other letters and sounds in the word that are kind of cluing you and cueing you in and saying, hey, wait a minute, there are other things going on here.
Right, but doesn't this go back to this kind of adultopomorphic, analytical oversight on the system? I mean, from the child's perspective, as the child's trying to learn their way in it. I mean, first of all, I'm going to say there's no question that the morphological preservation that's going on is valuable and helpful. That you can now, it certainly enables us to go faster than we can read if it was purely sound based.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, it allows us to read cells and units and understand the meaning of a word without having to go through this sound out process. There's a lot of benefits to it. But to the struggling reader who's coming out of an oral language, this kind of confusion is confusing.
Sure. And it really argues, there's no question that if you're trying to learn a complex system, there are benefits from complex systems, but ease of learning usually isn't one of them. The benefits of this are really worth preserving. And so what it really suggests is rather than changing the technology, changing the code, we really are better off trying to change our teaching. What it suggests to me, for example, is that you'd want to teach kids letter sounds. You'd want to try to teach decoding in terms of how do you go from print to oral language. Having said that, we're not talking about a simple system. We're not talking about, we'll just teach some sounds and everything's going to be fine. It's not that simple. You better teach it several other things as you're doing this, and so that the sort of notion of we're going to stop everything while we learn the code and then everything's going to be fine doesn't work so well in English. If you're a first grade teacher, yes, you should be teaching phonics, but you should also be teaching vocabulary. You should also be teaching comprehension. You should also be having the kids write and so on and so forth, because it is a complex system. And if you try to do it too simply, for example, if I try to teach kids, if I go in a bunch of young children and I tell them, look, C makes a K. Whenever you see the letter C, think K. And I bury the kid in words that have C's, cat and car and cab and those kinds of words. And the youngster gets very good at responding like that. That's terrific. Except in the English language, C is associated with that sound only about 40% of the time. If I don't let them know that little secret, that this is going to work some of the time, but it isn't going to work other times, that there are other times when C is going to be associated with S. There are going to be other times when C is followed by the letter H, where you're going to hear ch. If I don't expose them both to the consistency of the language, but also to the inconsistency. And I think that's where some of the phonics programs and some of the phonics advocates go wrong. They treat it like it's such a simple system that they only want to teach the consistencies and not reveal the inconsistencies. And I think it leaves the kids exposed. I think what it means is the youngster who is most dependent on the teacher, who's the less certain in his own learning ability, is the one who gets misled by that kind of teaching. And so the trick here is to teach the code, but to teach it in some of its real complexity. And that's, we seem to go back and forth between the pole of we shouldn't teach the code, or we should teach it, but teach it in this super simple way that doesn't actually work and hasn't worked in English for 500 years.
Right. Well, it seems that one of the analogies I make, I mean, I don't think we can change the code. You remember that from our conversation.
People have tried it.
But I do think that we got to think about it differently. I mean, after all, what we're saying is that 100 million people are having their lives mangled because of a technological code that we've been ignorant to negligent about. That's a few hundred years old.
Well, I mean, this code and the way that we've infused it in our society has really helped us become quite wealthy. I mean, it's really done wonderful things for us as a society, and certainly individually. But as a society, I think there's a reason why Western societies are as wealthy as they are, why they're able to gain so many resources for their inhabitants and their citizens. It's literacy is a big part of that, and so. It's been hugely beneficial, but it is leaving people out, and far too many people. And so the key here is finding ways to let them in. I think one of the things, when we thought it was simple, or when we only were worried about a few people learning, we treated schooling, especially the schooling in literacy, as something that could happen in a year or two. We didn't sort of take a longer view. If you as a former first grade teacher, it used to be that the notion was you'd learn to read in first grade. And so everyone who walked into first grade, and most of them, in fact, who walked into first grade didn't know how to read in those days. And when they walked out of first grade, they were all supposed to know how to read. Well, it didn't exactly work that way. I had, in one of my classes, I had something like 31 or 32 children. One child walked in reading as well as any third or fourth grader. And the other 30 walked in not knowing how to read. I wish I could tell you that they all walked out knowing how to read at the end of the year, but they didn't. Well, instead of sort of blaming me or blaming the kids or getting on the parents or getting on society, what if we started teaching reading to those youngsters in kindergarten instead of first grade? Now we've got 2 years to do it. What if we started in preschool and put more kids in preschool and gave them that opportunity and started the reading process then instead of in first grade? What if we didn't hold the parents sort of at arm's length, and that they shouldn't be doing things with the code at home, but actually encouraged them and supported them in getting involved in not just making books available to their kids, but actually involved in teaching their kids about literacy, because we know when they do that, their kids do much better. I guess what I'm suggesting is, we've created a very steep ramp. What if we tip the ramp? We still want to end up the same place, but let's give it more time. Let's put more resources in more ways, so that more of those cars get up the ramp, more of those kids get over the learning hump. Those are some simple things. Of course, once you start to be taught, getting a fuller conception of what it means to learn to be literate, putting both reading and writing into the package, I would argue, is a piece of it. Focusing on phonics early on, but focusing on comprehension early on. Dealing not just with the pronunciation of words, but with learning new words, the meanings of new words, and even how they work morphemically in terms of the EDs and INGs and any other meaningful parts, the S's and so on. We don't have to wait on all those things. I think that when people have tried to wait on those, they find that they cut out other kids. They're children who fail to learn. So I've always insisted in my schools, when I've been an administrator or when I've been a consultant working with a school and school improvement, especially in low achieving schools, I want 2 to 3 hours a day of reading and writing instruction, not, an hour or an hour and a half, and we can use a lot of that time to do other things. I want, a substantial amount of teaching, because I know with more teaching, whether it's more teaching that takes place preschool, for kindergarten, first grade, after school, at home, summer, however we expand instruction within the school day. If we do any of that, what you find is you get more literate people. You get more kids who get over the hump. And so maybe one child learns it faster than another child, but if we extend that ramp out, you're going to find that a larger number of people can make it. And it's making it that we really care about.
Yeah, no question. So the more opportunities and the longer the duration of engagement, the greater the probability they're going to get.
That's absolutely right.
And
that's actually, when it comes to school resources and inputs that we can do as a society, it's the one changeable resource that has the biggest impact on learning. Amount of instruction matters more than everything. I mean, it's as much as I care about quality, as much as my career has been trying to figure out better ways of doing things, the amount of teaching our children get still matters more than anything else that we do. So let's get them a lot of teaching. Let's make sure that that teaching time is really spent teaching. And then, obviously, it's not enough to just have teaching time. The teaching time has to be spent teaching the real stuff. And I think it's the content, it's the curriculum.
Which again has to go back to meeting the child with what it is
That's
that they're needing.
absolutely.
So as to not let them be stewing in some confusion while you pass them by.
Absolutely.
All of those with that.
And so that means really having a clear conception of what the code is, what reading entails, what literacy entails, teaching it to kids in a very thorough way, being very explicit about it, not just leaving it to chance. Kids are incredibly smart. They learn even when we screw up. They learn even when we don't do the best job. Problem is that we can come to rely on those really smart kids who learn even when we don't do a good job, and what it means is that we're not as explicit as we need to be when a youngster does have a learning problem. The key is going in there and having a very clear idea about what needs to be taught and being explicit about that with all kids. That explicitness won't hold back the kid who just gets it, but it'll make all the difference in the world to the kid who doesn't.
It seems to me, talking like I talked with Crash, and it's all about books.
Yep.
The biggest thing is just about books. Talk with Allington. I'm just curious because I try to get all
Sure.
the dimensions. And he makes the analogy, well, it's like whirling dervish dancing. Talk to phonics people, and they think phonics is the right way, rather than a code patch
Right.
that we develop to try to deal with all these irregularities.
To me, it's maybe, I don't know if it's more complex or simpler. Think of it almost like a daisy. And in the middle of the daisy are the two most important things: amount of instruction and what the content is. That you're teaching kids about the code, that you're teaching kids how to understand, that you're teaching kids new words, that you're actually, that there's real content there. All the petals of the daisy are important, but they're not as important as what's going on in the middle. It's amount of instruction and what you teach. Each of the petals is another piece of the puzzle. Good teachers. Gee, if you have a good teacher, the chances of getting that middle of the petal is a lot higher. Parents who are supportive of their kids' learning. Oh, that's great. Books. Hey, yeah, that matters, but only to the extent that it extends the amount of instruction that kids get, or that it focuses the kids' attention on the stuff they have to learn. And that's true of, good administrators. Anything that you can think of in terms of how we make schools better, how we make homes better, how we support children better in our society. They're only going to improve reading to the extent that they increase the kids' opportunity to learn, and that's in those in that middle of that daisy. It's that amount of time with books, that amount of time being taught, but also what they're being exposed to. So to me, it's a real simple model. It's content and opportunity, and everything else is just a lever or a connection that helps you do that or that doesn't help you do that.
That's great. That's a great piece. Inside of that, I'm right with you to that point. I say it's about unfolding the ambiguity and reducing the shame in relation to it.
Yep. So if you say to me, well, how are you going to do that? Well, we could do that through teacher education. We could do that through better curriculum. We could do that through, we're going to need studies to understand how to do this piece better. There are all kinds of actions that we can take as adults that will help us to accomplish what's in the middle of that daisy. But those are always indirect, because it still comes down to what's in there. And it's why even when the resources aren't great, we can succeed in some cases, because the key resources are there. It's why when we make certain changes on the outside, that, gee, of course that worked. You increased the amount you were teaching kids, or of course that worked. You started teaching kids about this confusion and helped them clarify that, and you weren't doing that before. And so good that you used teacher education that way, or good that you used assessment that way, or good that you used administering schools differently in that way. And I think that's the key to understanding that all these other actions that we take are always indirect. That they only improve it to the extent that it increases the amount of teaching the kids get, and that it increases the chances that they can understand those confusions, that they can understand how this thing works, that they have the elements that matter.
And that they're enveloped in a context that doesn't, that works against them going into the self-shame when they are.
All those things around the daisy that can help make the middle part of it operate can also distract from it and disturb it. And so, if I do a lousy job here at the university with teacher education, and my teachers are so confused about the teaching of reading that they go out and they don't teach much of it, or they only teach parts of it and leave the kids more confused than they were before, instead of raising literacy, what we did is we lowered it. We really, cut back on what kids could know. We cut their opportunity rather than extending it.
A couple of other things. This is great. Thank you so much.
Are we okay?
Proficiency in basic. I talk to a lot of people that say, proficiency doesn't really matter. It's just it's a meaningless measure as opposed to basic. And I talk to other people, and it seems as if, and I kind of come down more on the side myself, that basic is this instrumental ability to read,
Mm-hmm.
but that hasn't become so effortlessly transparent that I want to extend, that I can read like I can speak.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, that it just I can pick up something and go into it,
Yep.
and that the difference between them are incredibly significant. Now, they may not register perfectly with the way Nate makes those assessments, but that distinction is an important one.
I agree with you. I do think that there's a technical argument here, and I've been involved in setting those levels, and I don't know to what extent I believe in them in terms of NAEP levels, and if you get 19 right on this test, that it means this and not that. But fundamentally, the idea holds that there are kids who can't use literacy at all or very little. There are kids who can use it to sort of get by. They can kind of do their school assignments. They can't necessarily do them very well. They're more your C and D students, but it's not that they can't read at all. There are kids who seemingly effortlessly can use literacy, that it doesn't become an issue if they're given a social studies assignment. It's not an issue if they have to take a note home, to their parents about taking part in Little League or whatever. They can look at that and understand what that's about. I think there really are distinctions in participation level and what kids can do and how much literacy blocks that. How well the national data match up with that, I don't know. But certainly you can go to schools where you'll find large numbers of kids who are more at what they would describe as the basic level, that can't quite do, say, their grade level of work. Maybe they can read like a second or third grade level, but unfortunately they're in fourth grade and they're given a fourth grade science book or social studies book, and it's not that they can't make heads or tails of it, they can't think very deeply with it because they're cut off from a lot of the information, or they can make some sense of it, but they've got to work hard at it to make sense of it because their literacy skills are limited enough. Those kids exist, and in some cases it's a very large percentage of our population.
It seems to me that this is really important because whereas on the one hand, we might say that these distinctions are important for focusing our instructional priorities and so forth, it seems to me that we have to say that anyone who's not reading at a level of proficiency that allows the reading process to be transparent in a way similar to the way oral language works. Sure, there's a stretch when they encounter a new word.
Mm-hmm.
There was a stretch for you and I when we encounter a new word. But to be below that is to be disadvantaged.
Absolutely.
And in that sense, most of the children are disadvantaged.
Yeah, if you look at NAEP scores, they put, it varies from year to year, but 6 to 8% of the kids in what they call the advanced category. And these are, to be real highfalutin about it, these are kids who can read science and they can read history and they can use it to think with it. And they can, they really can, they can read historical materials the way a historian might want to think about it and so on. certainly most of our kids can't do that. They're unable to read, to process information in those ways. And I guess I not only think we need to shrink the basic group, that is, get everybody up to a level where they can participate easily, but in most of what society has to offer. But I think, when I look and see that, 6, 8, 9% of people are able to do these highest levels of reading, I say that seems too small for a country this wealthy, for a country with the international responsibilities that we have, and so on and so forth. It strikes me that we need a much larger group of people who can understand the highest levels of information, who can do the best thinking with the information that they have. I don't think we're aiming at that. I don't think we're trying to expand that pool in any obvious way. We really want to move the entire distribution. Those kids who can't read at all, I think we need to get to the bottom of that and make sure that they can, that very small cluster. I think those kids who are basic and below basic and therefore can't really do the work even at their own level fully and accurately and so on, we need to change that. But I think we even have to take those people who are in that proficient group and try to move them up. If you live in a wealthy suburb and your kids are doing great in school, they still are often unable to do some of the kinds of things that I'm talking about in terms of, say, reading a science text or writing a piece that other people could actually enjoy or learn from. We really need to raise the bar for them as well.
We say, according to NAEP, there's like 88% of Black fourth grade children are below proficient.
Mm-hmm.
The national average is like 64%.
Mm-hmm.
Below proficient. What we're saying is that these are human beings whose lives are seriously disadvantaged.
Yes.
Because they didn't come through this ramp of learning to read well, and it's affecting who they are, how they feel about who they are, as well as all of their opportunities in the world.
It is, literacy is distributed unfairly, unequally. It is not that every community has just as many literate folks as others, that every income level has the same levels of literacy. The fact is it's not equivalent. African Americans are greatly disadvantaged in our society. For the last 50 years, the society has made tremendous strides to make sure that blacks got included economically, that blacks get included socially, that blacks be part of the political process. All kinds of horrible barriers have been removed. And yet, literacy remains a very real barrier in the lives of far too many African Americans. There are lots of African Americans who can read better than the white average. There are all kinds of African Americans who can read better than me. That said, there are a disproportionate percentage of African Americans who are reading below average in the United States. It's more than the 50% that would be fair. Which means that it's going to be tough in this next generation for our children to live in an equal society, in a society where race doesn't matter, after all of the efforts of the last 50 years. And I think that's just terrible. What seems to be happening more and more, though, is that there's a tendency to look and say literacy is unequally distributed across income levels. That is, if you grow up in a poor neighborhood or you're from a poor family, it doesn't mean you're going to be low in literacy, but the chances are higher that you're going to be low in literacy if you come from a poor background than from a more advantaged background. I came from a fairly poor background. I managed to learn to read. A lot of the kids around me probably didn't. To the same extent, and they've had to go forward in life without that advantage that I carried. There's a tendency by governments, policymakers, school people to say, oh, we see this problem. We've got this race that isn't doing so well. We've got this language group that isn't doing so well. We've got this income group that isn't doing so well. I know, let's set up a special program for them and try to raise their literacy and everything will be fine. The problem is that quite often, and this goes back to some of the shame issues that we're talking about, quite often when you do that, the folks who have responsibility in those situations look and go, oh, it's just another program for us. It's just one more effort to fix us. And I think you get fairly low levels of cooperation. I think people, in some ways, I mean, shame is one of the outcomes, but there's a kind of fatalism that sets in as well, which is, in a way, it's almost antithetical to shame, because I accept my lot.
To what degree is that the protection from the shame?
Oh no, I agree that it is a protection against shame. But what it does, fatalism keeps you from trying. Fatalism keeps you from changing things. When I went into the Chicago public schools, and I was able to tell them that the things I was doing with literacy to raise achievement, I was doing not because it was an urban system, not because it had a larger portion of low-income kids. It's 85% low income. That it had a larger proportion of low-income schools and kids than other communities. I wasn't doing it because they were minority kids. I was doing exactly the same things that I was doing in wealthy suburbs, that I was doing in districts that were largely or entirely white, that I was doing, even if it was the children of CEOs, that I was making sure that the changes that took place were exactly what I'd want for my own children. And in doing that, I must say I was absolutely stunned that when people found that out, the level of cooperation and the intensity of their effort to try to solve the literacy problem changed dramatically. That finally I wasn't segregating them, that finally I wasn't saying to them that here's a special fix because you're a special kind of person, but that the kinds of teaching that matter for everybody are what matter for poor kids and black kids and immigrant kids. And we're going to make sure they get that. Something that simple. And what that says to me is, let's not go narrowly down this road. Let's not see if we can identify the target children who need some extra assistance and fix them. Let's not just go out and hit a few schools because they're doing less well than some other schools. Let's take what we know about the code and literacy learning and put it system-wide. Let's raise those proficient to advanced. Let's pull those basics up to proficient. It's not this simple sort of, targeted surgically, we will go in and fix a few problems. I really see the solution as being much broader based than that. It's less about fixing something than it is about opening doors and creating opportunities for everybody.
Great. Just hold there. Are you okay with another 10 minutes or so?
Sure, whatever you need. Whatever you need. Well, where am I? Yeah, I'm fine.
Views and allowing the teachers, and the practitioners to gravitate to them because they feel good. I mean, there's this chain, it seems to me, that's based on these illusions and myths. Phonics and whole language, both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's not about either of those. It's about, again, if you stay to that simple view of kids have to be taught the things they need to know to be literate, and it takes time to do that, and everything else is just commentary, I think you're home free. I really do. It gives you the tools, because it means that when you put something in, if you, I know what we're going to do. We're going to buy a different program. That'll fix it. It'll only fix it to the extent that it does those two things I just said. And in some cases it does that. In lots of cases it doesn't. It just moves the pieces around on the board.
It's easy to understand. I mean, I can, as you mentioned earlier, how you can kind of jump perspectives and go, yeah, I can understand that.
Sure.
I do that. I talk with Chris Doherty and Russ Whitehurst, and it's very clear that if I was a government, I'd say, look, we don't have time for any more of this conversation. We're going to institute some control mechanisms. We're tired of seeing millions of kids just splat against this wall that we could be doing better with. And so rather than waiting for this whole community to learn and wake up about it, we're going to implement some controls.
Sure.
On the other hand, I can be with a teacher and fully sympathize with the fact that, I don't want this draconian control mechanism telling me how I got to do everything. We can talk with blank father of direct instruction. And be right with him on the direct instruction model, and at the same time want to turn it all inside out and say, but it's not about the instruction. The instruction is a context for learning. It's about how we unfold the learning, and that looks a lot like direct instruction in certain ways, right? I mean, all these perspectives have in common, or should have in common, that first and foremost, our major intention here is to be stewarding the health of the participation and learning of the children.
And I guess I would say, if we stay with my analogy, at the center of that daisy, you would think would be the same for all of them, and that would be the focus. Unfortunately, the arguments are around the periphery. It is about how do you get people to do things. It is about control, and so people are staying out here arguing about that instead of, look, to the winner, what means winning in this thing is that you have managed to either increase the amount of time you're going to give these kids, or you have made sure that people are teaching what needs to be taught.
Which itself is
That's
a
it.
good thing. More children are learning well.
Absolutely, because
that's the stem and the daisy.
Absolutely, that's fundamentally the whole thing, isn't it? Unfortunately, the arguments are, I know a better way to control this. I have a better way to move people. I don't trust your way of moving people. It's not going to get us there. Unfortunately, all of these ways are imperfect. There isn't a single one of, whether it's policy, whether it's funding, whether it's teaching, whether it's training, whether, it doesn't matter. They're all imperfect because they all have an indirect link to what goes on in the middle of that process. And so I don't care, we've got the best teacher education program and Reed Lyon wants it, and, I don't know, Dick Ellington wants it, and we're going to put that in place. And it'll only work to the extent that the teachers spend more time teaching the kids, or that they teach pieces of the process that maybe were being missed before, or they explain those pieces better. Because if those two things don't change, nothing else happens.
About the freshness of it, that you get the mammalian effect.
Oh, absolutely. But that's usually a time issue. Typically what will happen there is, well, this is so exciting, I'll stay with it more. But next year I'm going to put the time back where it was because now I'm not so excited about it.
Right.
Most reforms, if you look, they succeed because they increase the amount of teaching, not because they do so much better job. That's sad. I think the problem is we're giving kids such a small amount of teaching across the society, especially in the lowest income schools, that it's easy to increase it. It's easy to raise achievement in the short run simply by making sure kids get more. I think if we made sure that everybody was getting a fairly solid dose of teaching through their early lives, I think some of the differences would go away, but then all of a sudden some of the quality differences would matter a lot more. Then you could say, well, these kids are getting better teaching than these kids. Right now, it doesn't matter that these kids are getting better teaching. If they're only being taught an hour a day and these kids are being taught 2 hours a day, but it isn't so wonderful, they still might be doing better. It's...
And this resolves down to, there seems to be, there's this, I make the analogy to statistical, to Renaissance cannon fire. Okay, we're going to fire the cannon. We're going to measure where did it hit. The little dust cloud came up at 30 degrees over to the right and 100 yards downstream. And so we're going to move the cannon a little bit to the left and fire it again and see where that works. Mm-hmm. We've got this kind of a process.
Absolutely.
That the majority of this proceeds from the assumption that there's actually no way to sync up with the flow of the challenge that the child is experiencing, meet them in that challenge, and unfold a stairway through this confusion that actually works for them.
We can't see into the brain, and I don't mean they're the technical brain. I'm not talking, in terms of, if we can see which synapses are firing, everything's going to be fine. I'm really talking the mind. We can't see into what this child is thinking right now, how he's perceiving what we're explaining. I'm telling the child to look at this, and he's looking at the wrong thing. I'm telling him to pay attention to this, and he's listening to the wrong part of it. Or possibly his brain isn't processing that. Maybe he really isn't seeing or hearing what he needs to. We can't tell.
Maybe we've never tried to actually orchestrate the children giving us feedback in a different way.
Oh, absolutely. And as I've been in this field for a long time, I've been doing this most of my life, and I still often fail to do that. Even in my own home, I was teaching my oldest child to read. And I was going along great guns, and she knew many of her sounds, and she knew her letters, and she knew many of the words. And I was teaching undergrads at the time, and these were people preparing to be teachers, and they'd say, well, can your daughter read? And I'd say, no, she can't read yet, but she's really close. And they'd say, well, how do you know when she can read? And I'd say, well, It isn't the number of words and it isn't the number of sounds, because she knows this many words, but there's a kind of independence. There's a kind of ability where you can see this flow taking place by itself. And she isn't over that yet. And I don't know why, because she's really smart, but any day, I could go home tonight and she might be reading. And finally, after that going on for a while, I turned to my daughter and I said, Erin, you can't read. Why can't you read? Which had never occurred to me to do that. And she was 4 years old, and she said, if I could read, you wouldn't read to me anymore. And I said, well, that isn't true. I would still read to you. She said, you'd read to me? And I said, yeah. 2 days later, she could read. I mean, that's absolutely a true story. She could do that, and she had all the pieces. It just gave her a reason to put it together. She'd been resisting learning to read. She'd been avoiding learning to read because she thought it would make her independent, and if she were independent, she'd lose something. She was 4. She wanted her dependency on her parents.
Yeah. One of the things that we've done as an experiment was to get some reading coaches, people that are teaching reading, which, by the way, been into some literacy training environments for disadvantaged children who are really struggling, and watch these reading circles and reading programs that are in action. And when it comes down to it, we're talking about the child actually has to be engaged, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at them, you measure the amount of time when the child's actually engaged, right? In a 2-hour afternoon program, it's like 6 or 7 minutes. 6 or 7 minutes
Absolutely.
in a 2-hour afternoon literacy program.
Absolutely.
They're actually engaged in
Absolutely.
it. And when they are engaged in it, nobody's tracking with them.
That's exactly right.
So we say, look, there's a direct correspondence between the code confusions and the articulation stutters
Absolutely.
of the child reading. The closer that you can get to being in sync, because in a way, if you can read right now, to the average good reading adult, the code confusions are transparent.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you could see them yourself,
Right.
as the child is struggling, you can see the confusions. You can see where they're going to stutter.
Mm-hmm.
You can see where they're going to confuse. As you get closer and closer to that, you have the intimacy of connection to be guiding and cueing them.
Absolutely.
It's entirely different than proceeding according to some map or assumption, phonics, whole language, or otherwise.
Sure. I mean, that's part of the reason why tutoring is so powerful. I mean, we've done studies on tutoring, and tutoring just invariably, not just in reading, but in almost anything, tutoring does very well. You can learn in a group, but if my mind wanders when I'm being tutored, you'll pull me right back if you're my tutor. You're not going to let me drift off. If I'm confused by something, I'm the only one here to respond. You're not going to get distracted by hearing responses from 25 other kids, and so you'll deal with my confused response, and maybe you'll give me a better explanation. Maybe you'll show me the example again. You'll do something. It's awfully hard to do that if you have 25 or 30 kids sitting there. Some of that can be fixed by grouping kids differently, seating kids differently, making sure the classroom is quiet for certain kinds of activity so that the kids can hear the sounds better, making sure that even with the large group that you're getting around in kids' faces so that they can see how you're articulating. There are a whole range of things that can be done to improve on it, but it's awfully hard to beat that model of one-on-one teaching with a teacher who actually can see what you're understanding and what you're not. There's no question. So much time is lost just because confusions are allowed to creep in.
You have to wonder, when you look at how inefficient it is, whether it isn't actually more cost effective to find some way to meet these kids than to not, in terms of everything that's going to happen in the future, just purely economically, because we don't.
Well, what some schools are doing and what some programs are really pushing is a closer monitoring of kids' learning, so that you break learning down into fairly small steps. It doesn't mean you necessarily teach them all in those little steps, but because it can be hard to put them back together again. But you break it down so that you have a clear idea of what kids are getting and what they aren't. You assess them frequently, whether that means sitting them down, giving them a little test, or whether that means just observing what they can do and monitoring that. But when kids aren't getting it, then something kicks in, something happens. Far too many classrooms, the teacher sees that something isn't working, and there's no resource to make anything happen. There isn't an aide there that can maybe spend a few extra minutes, re-going through something. There isn't a computer system there that'll allow the kid to log on and maybe redo the lesson. There isn't an after-school program where kids who are struggling with that skill are going to get some extra teaching. But in some schools, those things do exist, and people are doing those things. The teacher's taking extra time during the day to sit down with those kids and do reteaching. Of course, they do better than schools where those things aren't happening.
To the many things from when I was watching doing the email this morning, and in the background CNN News. I rarely
Screw that.
But there was a statistic that came out, which was that since 9/11, we spent $119 billion in the war in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I don't know how many billion more in the war in terror. This is a whole lot less than we spend on reading-related issues.
Mm-hmm.
From everything, from the direct costs of instruction to the indirect but still substantial costs associated with the social pathologies that we connect, remedial. This is a bigger social economic issue than the war on crime and drugs and terror.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In terms of economics and in terms of probably numbers of lives taught, literacy is probably bigger than other problems that we probably invest a lot more in. We need more money for research. We need more money to attract and to be able to assign the best teachers to the toughest places to teach. We certainly, in some cases, the schools are kind of falling down. In some cases, we're not reaching out to parents early enough to get them involved and to get their kids involved. I mean, there was a lovely study done in Boston where they were finding that the middle-class parents would see that their kids were getting ready to go to school, and in 6 months, Junior's going to be off to kindergarten, so I'd better teach him his letter name so that the teacher will understand, that this is a good home and that this kid knows what he needs to know. They'd go into the lower income families and they'd work with their kids too. As soon as they saw that the school was teaching letters, they'd start working with the letters with the kids. It's a very different, communication system. Well, that's an advantage in those middle class communities, that they're not afraid of the school. Well, schools can reach out. Schools can reach out to parents and so on. Resources to do things like that. We've treated literacy like it's something that gets accomplished by the time you're 8, and then we don't have to think about it after that. People in the schools know that it's not done at 8. In fact, it isn't done by the time you're my age, that you're still becoming more literate. We need to invest in literacy instruction, really, certainly across K-12 education. There's no excuse for high schools not doing serious things. And certainly remedial things for kids who are lagging far behind. But building the literacy of all their students so that they can go off to the lives that they really want to have. Full participation.
So that implies really reworking this 4th grade slump threshold.
Oh, absolutely. When I went into Chicago, the first question they asked me about whether I'd take the job, they said, what would it take to get you to take this? And I guess now in retrospect, I guess they meant money. I wasn't thinking of those terms. I said, well, first of all, it would have to be whatever I came in and did could not just be for particular grade levels. I would want the entire system. I would want pre-K through 12. I would want not just the first language kids. I would want kids who are coming to English as a second language. I wouldn't just want the regular classroom children. I would want the special education kids who are maybe having some trouble with learning or other things as well. I wanted all the children to be engaged in learning to read and write better. They gave me that opportunity. It rarely is given. Typically, these initiatives are K-3, they're elementary, they're only for low kids, they're only for poor kids. I said, no way, I wanted all 600 schools, I wanted the whole system. And, I still think that that's the right way to go. I think that it's okay to have a targeted program that hits a segment. as long as that targeted program is just trying to better articulate what you're doing with everybody. I'm afraid that isn't what's going on with a lot of what we're doing in our literacy initiatives. And it's one of the reasons for the divisions and the arguments, in my opinion.
What haven't we talked about that's important?
Oh, goodness. We probably haven't talked very much about kids who come to this language, not knowing English, which is a huge issue these days with so many millions of immigrants. Not just true in the United States, of course. It's true in all Western societies, not even just English-speaking societies. The immigration is huge. We've been looking at the research. The National Reading Panel looked at research for Congress to see what the best ways to teach kids to learn to read. And that panel had to be highly selective and pick particular topics that they thought were most important. I was a member of that panel, and we picked a number of topics and went off and found all the research. We looked at 5 different aspects of reading and found more than 400 studies that had been conducted on those things that had been published in the journals. There's another panel in place right now that's looking specifically at those same, it's looking at a wider set of issues, but looking at those same issues with second language learners, with kids who are coming to English as a second language. And we're finding something on the order of 19 or 20 studies of that kind on those kinds of kids. I mean, almost no research. This is an area where we need to invest. Kids who come here, important part of our society. They're going to be an important part of our workplace in the future. If we don't find better ways of succeeding with them, you're going to see literacy levels going down, not up, in the United States, and in fact in other English-speaking countries and Western countries. We need to make sure that the education system reaches out to them well. They're the kids who are most likely to drop out of our schools. They're the kids whose parents are often the most afraid or the least equipped to help their children to do well in school. They are certainly often the ones that we're not doing what we need to do with them. And so I would suggest that when we talk about learning the code, we've got to not just think of that 5-year-old who's coming to school for the first time and, with great hopes, but not knowing what's about to hit them. But we also have to think of that child from Mexico who comes here when he's 8, that child from Thailand who comes here when he's 11, that child from any place that comes here at any age, that we don't necessarily have purchase on what's best to do with those kids. And that doesn't stop our policymakers, of course, and that doesn't stop people in roles like mine from kind of spouting off what we think would be best. But we really need research money. We really need money to experiment and to try things out, and to, not just for the researchers, but even at the school level, to why don't we try this 3 different ways and see what seems to work best for us, because we have to succeed with these kids, and right now we're not doing a good enough job there.
And in a conversation I had in China, so there's 100 million adults trying to learn English.
Absolutely.
It's now been mandated that all children in school will learn to read English.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about somebody who's coming in with an oral language background other than English, and one of the fundamental tenets of learning to read English is that the code's got to play the oral language that's there. If the oral language isn't there, and if the oral language is of a different phonemic structure,
mm-hmm.
and if they've had reading experience that has a different, like Spanish, one of my favorites is that, you can go down to, it's virtually phonetic. The exceptions that somebody that grows up reading in a phonetic system is going to have their brain conditioned to processing in a way that's going to work against them trying to learn to read English.
Absolutely. I think when you look at the different languages that folks are coming from, when you look at the fact that some are coming here already being literate in a home language, in some cases they're coming in with no literacy at all, so that their home language plays out a little different way within English. When you look at the different phonemic and syntactic structures across languages that become hurdles that people have to handle, maybe particular sounds that might not exist in their language that we use in English, and so on. it really points out why you can't have a sort of a one-size-fits-all response. If we all just buy a particular reading program, or if we all, go through a particular training program, everything's going to be fine. That's not the case. You can go into schools within 5 miles of where we sit, where there are 40 and 50 language groups in the same school. Teaching reading is not, just a one-size-fits-all. You have to have some room for teachers to adjust, for schools to adjust to the actual needs of their kids, to the knowledge of their teachers, to the situation that they find themselves in. And that means that there are going to be some big differences. Similarities, the content of reading doesn't seem to change very much, even across languages. You still have to learn the same code. The English code is still there. What it takes to get to that code might vary a bit.
And the vocabulary that's going to be relevant, interesting, and work in any way resonant with the oral vocabulary they may already have.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, it's an incredibly complex.
And so research into those cultural issues, into those language issues, into those learning issues for those second language learners is incredibly important, as is, more thoughtful practice, as is, those of us at the university not getting too doctrinaire, those of the, people in the political community. It might be nice to get a referendum through to tell schools how to do this stuff, but we really don't know the best ways, and it might be a little safer to require trying different things and monitoring more carefully how we're doing with different approaches than monitoring a specific approach.
That touches on a real nerve in the politics government at the moment.
Yes.
My sense is that I'll just use they want to put a clamp on all of the dissent, all of the difference, and really get subscription to what they're driving.
Yep.
And so the idea that they would allow a general impression that we really don't know what we're doing yet, we're going to tune our way in, would feed into the thing they're trying to stop. And so there's this artificial solidarity and uniformity, even while they say, we're not saying one size fits all, we are saying we need to do various things, but there's any idea of balanced whole.
Right.
There seems to be this basic dichotomy. On the one hand, it's really clear human beings learn best when what they're learning about and with is meaningful. Without it, they don't have interest. Without interest, they don't have engagement. They don't have the cognitive alignment. They need to learn something. On the other hand, the code.
Well, that's and see, Canute couldn't sit at the edge of the sea and order the tide out, and any more than modern day Canutes can order people to learn in particular ways, or that particular conditions are going to be better for learning. They just don't have control over that. They certainly have control over making sure that certain things happen and that certain money is spent and setting certain goals and so on. And I certainly don't mean any disrespect to the policy maker on those kinds of things. But the notion that they can take something that is an issue of fact or science and order it to be a particular way doesn't make much sense. And I'm afraid in some cases that is what our policymakers seem to be trying to do.
Which creates the resistance they're trying to avoid.
Which creates resistance, which keeps the argument away from the real central part of all of this, which is how do we get kids enough of the kinds of teaching that they need to allow them to do best. And that's really fundamentally what it's all supposed to be about.
One other thing that I wanted to touch on, and I invite you after this, we'll put a close to this, to think of anything else. I actually had oral language ESL immigration from our last conversation.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't remember we'd talked about it before. I just wanted to make sure we got it.
Great. If there's anything else, the other thing is timing of automaticity. We talked about that in our last conversation. That's really critical. One of the things that we're trying to do is ultimately we want to see this from the inside out view of the child learning to read and help people understand that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
But by seeing the expressions on their face,
sure,
confusions in the code, overlaying schematical models of processing, fMRIs, so that we get a sense of this from 3,500 years of code history to 35 milliseconds of processing criticality.
Wow. That's, it's for a youngster, when they're entering into this, obviously they can't possibly know the complexity that they're going to end up engaging with. And so I think the first attempt that anyone makes at learning anything is to come to closure very quickly, to assume, I see how this works and I'll learn it. And so, the youngster, sees the words elephant and ant, and he's certain which one must be elephant, because elephants are bigger than ants. And so that's an easy one. Of course, when you see, other words, when you see centipede, and all of a sudden centipedes are bigger than elephants, how can that be? That's a very confusing thing to the youngster. When they look at the cereal box and they're sure it says Tony Tiger, or they're sure it says cereal or Rice Krispies or some such thing, or on the toothpaste, they're sure that word must be toothpaste. They have a system in mind. They're trying to invent something that will allow them to understand how this system works. And each of those times when they do that, they hit a wall. When I was quite young, when I was about 5, my grandmother used to write letters to me, and my mother would read them. They were always in handwriting. And I decided one day I was going to write a letter to my grandmother. And so I sat down and I scribbled away something that looked like cursive writing, I thought, and took it to my mother and said, look, I wrote a letter for my grandmother. And she set it aside, because it didn't make any sense. There wasn't anything there. I didn't understand it had to be a social code, that it was a shared code that people had to learn. I just thought it was a physical representation that looked a certain way. And so I created it. My mother's disdain for it, her lack of interest in it, communicated something extremely important to me. It told me that it didn't work the way I thought it did, and I had to think about it again and had to watch more closely and so on. I'm afraid that at times our teaching pushes kids away from doing that rethinking, that doesn't recognize when you misunderstand and think it's the squiggles on the page that convey your feelings and your ideas, and not having a shared means of communication that you had to learn. I don't think our children get exposed to those kinds of ideas very directly, and I think we should be both creating opportunities for that kind of mistake to happen, but we should also be explaining things like code to children and getting them to try to invent their own and all kinds of things, not to replace English, not to take the place of English, but to help them gain the insights that they're going to need to actually understand how to learn this process.
Yeah, that's a big one. I think I mentioned to you in an email. We want to gather up people like yourself, leaders from all different sectors, literacy, child psychology, cognitive science, form an alliance to oversee and develop the kind of pedagogical threads that the world's best animated movie team can work
Wow.
to put a story on top of.
Wow.
So that kids and adults with low literacy
Could see
have
it.
a reframing experience of all this.
Absolutely. That would be absolutely fabulous. I mean,
Did you participate in that?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Good.
I mean, I've always thought that knowing the stuff of literacy, or long thought that knowing the stuff of literacy was part of it. Knowing how it works, how it's learned, how we use it socially. In fact, I had created a course here at the university called Literacy in Society, so teachers could just see how the literacy was actually used, and they'd have to go in a workplace, and they'd have to study election materials, and they'd have to look at, we'd read the research on how literacy was used socially, and I'd make people think of their favorite books and why they were their favorite books, and I'd make them keep literacy diaries and all these different things, just trying to, not how to teach it, but how to understand it, how to think about its pieces and how it fits together and how it interacts with your language and the way you think and just a whole range of things. And it often was a life-changing experience for the teachers, and it certainly was for me in teaching the course. And so we've always talked about, well, how would we bring that to kids? And we have some fairly imperfect ways of bringing fairly external parts of it to kids. But when it gets down to how would you show them the complexity of seeing that letter C come up 9 times in 100 words with 4 different sounds attached to it, maybe no sound attached to it in some case. What would they? How do you think about that? How do you deal with that level of complexity? Would be absolutely fabulous.
We're really interested in telling the story. I mean, this story of the code is the story of us.
Yeah, no, it really is.
I don't know if you ever read The Alphabet Effect by Logan?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
I interviewed Logan last week.
Oh, really?
Toronto. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
David Abrams worked with
Mm-hmm. I touched it. I wasn't supposed to do that. I'm sorry. I've been pretty good right up to then. I usually touch them.
So to tell the story, so as these letters battle and confuse, and how that unfolds to become the kind of challenges to show how fresh and new and how the world around is built out of this stuff.
I mean, one of the teachers in one of those classes that I was telling you about, she went out and studied a workplace, and she picked the work. I told them they couldn't pick teaching or being principal. Those that were out, but any other job they wanted to look at. And people would go sort of two ends. There'd be people would go, look, I'm going to look at a doctor, a nurse, a lawyer, that kind of thing. There'd be people who'd go, I'm going to go down to McDonald's and see what kind of literacy there is there. Everyone always came back finding lots of it. One actually rode around in a police car for a night. I mean, they do different things, but this particular one said that her high school students were always telling her that they were going to get better jobs than her because their uncle was a truck driver and he made more money, or their father was a mechanic and he made more money. So she thought, I'm going to go look into this. And she went down to a garage that fixed cars and a bunch of mechanics, and found that the head mechanic, who was about 23, 24, had his BS degree from Northwestern University, that he essentially, according to the owner, was the new model of mechanic, that it was this highly educated, and while they were going to keep these other guys on, this fellow's job was essentially to do the reading for all of them and all the computer work for all of them, and that as they retired and left, they'd be replaced by guys like him. And so she brought back all the stuff that they had to be able to read, and they'd be like 6 entry point charts and things like that for ordering a part off the computer, that me with a PhD and the students in the class with their master's degree couldn't figure out how to read. And this is what these high school kids thought they were going to go and be able to get a job paying better than a teacher. The world has changed. It just isn't like that. And so being able to expose kids to how it's used, how it's wrapped up in life, how it's learned, what its complexity is what she started doing as a result of it is taking kids on a field trip. That she would take the kids from her reading class down to the garage to interview these guys and to write about them and to find out about the role of literacy in, say, being a car mechanic. And boy, were they surprised.
That's a great point. I remember when I was growing up, the two prominent things among teenagers was, I don't have to worry about school because I am going to be the next Willie Mays, or I'm going to be the next,
right? Absolutely.
Unitas, or whoever sports star, or I'm going to be the next rock star.
Oh, absolutely.
So there were these vents that kids that had trouble at school could go, well, I'll just do that, and nobody would tell them. The chances are like 1 in 15 million or something that trajectory is going to lead you there. Two
things. I mean, one, those jobs are so rare, and that chances are almost impossible that you're going to get to be the pro football player, that you're going to get to be the rock star. But somebody makes it, and even to do those things, the literacy involved. One of the students in my class went out and studied stand-up comedians, and there's an example of it's like a rock star. You're a performer. They spend most of the time writing. They walk around, with a notebook every place they go, because in fear that they'll forget something, that they won't, get something to make observations on. Writing is a constant part of that kind of work. Being a rock star, constant part of it. Being a baseball player, you're going to need contracts. You're going to have, your lawyer will do that for you. You'll be one of those players who ends up with no money. It's You want to be a football player? Try to get there without trying to go the college route. You want to be, it's a fool's errand to think that you can be successful even economically in this society, even with those specialized kinds of jobs without literacy. It just doesn't work that way.
One of the questions we ask the thought experiments, we say, imagine a world without reading and writing. It's absolutely impossible.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You have to go
It's
to go outside of what it means to be a human being today to get to any conception of it, and your conception of it's going to be tainted by the fact that you read and write and what that's done to the language you're thinking in about not reading.
I'd once thought about writing a short story about a guy who wanted to do away with vicarious experience. He really wanted to live, and so his first thing was, I'm going to get rid of all these books. I'm not going to read anymore. And then it figures out, well, he has to get rid of all the television and the movies and the radio. And then eventually figures out he can't talk to anybody. He's just totally lost. And he's gone. There's just nothing left. It doesn't work. You can't, this notion of somehow we're going to do away with this, or somehow technology will solve this problem when we can do this all verbally. Is almost the idea that we're going to hearken back to scribal times, and we're going to be able to go when there were a few people who were literate who really controlled the whole society, which of course would be horrible. But that is sort of the notion that some people have, because who would have literacy would be the people who created those computer programs that would do everything for us and manage us and think for us, and what it would mean to be human, I think, would probably be gone.
Anything else you want to add?
I think I've probably talked more than enough for anybody. Uh-oh.
She's great.
What we're talking about in a lot of this is pretty grim. We took a video camera and went around and saw the effects of literacy. Of people in dead and menial jobs, of people shut up in their houses because they're not going out and participating in society, of all these. I mean, this is grim, depressing stuff.
If you're low in literacy, it is probably grim and depressing. There are ways out of it. I mean, obviously becoming literate is a good way out of it. If you're really good with language, if you're really good socially, if you have other exceptional skills, you can overcome being low in literacy. We see people in the workplace who, I can't really read those memos, but I'm really good at going and talking to everybody else about those memos, so I find out what they really say. The problem is that for a society to depend on people having all those other skills that will somehow offset this, it still leaves things pretty grim for lots of people. I think that the issue is whether you focus on literacy or illiteracy. If you focus on illiteracy, of course it's grim, because you see people who mistake their medication, or you see somebody who loses a job, or maybe can't find the job in the first place, or avoids going to their church because they're afraid that the other parishioners are going to figure out that they're illiterate. On the positive side, I mean, look at the parents who are reading to their children. Look at the people who, like me, who came out of a background where you'd predict, gee, this kid wouldn't go to college, and he wouldn't, certainly be a professor, and he wouldn't be being interviewed by nice people like you. He'd be, in a much more limited kind of a work life, and probably a much more limited kind of social life in terms of knowing people around the world and so on. That because I had gotten the code early on, because teachers, parents, even other kids made sure I got it, because I fell in love with books, because I saw reading as a way of connecting to other parts of my life, whether it was baseball or politics or anything. Frankly, it allowed me to really open my life up to incredible experiences that I couldn't have had. And so, illiteracy is really a kind of a closed, sad subject. Literacy, even small amounts of it, are a much more exciting subject, much more open, much more connected to the world. We talk about differences in literacy knowledge, and there's no question that these differences matter, but having literacy at the highest level you can have it might not be at the level of your next door neighbor, but at the level that you have it, you can do an awful lot. The trick is making sure that you you put that much money in the bank, that you open that many doors and windows in your life so that you can do it. And so, my advice for any kid or adult who doesn't think they have enough, learn it, buckle down, focus. If you're a teacher responsible for children and adults like that, understand that this is it might have a very narrow end in terms of illiteracy, but it's constantly opening a vista that people move away from that, and they're really moving into the light when they do this. It's not an accident that the flame has always been the symbol of learning and the symbol of literacy. There's a reason for that. You are moving towards the light. The sad part is the folks who live in the part of the cave that's still pretty dark, and we obviously have a lot of work to do there. But no, I think this is something that really we should be much more hopeful about and much more joyous about. We can focus on the 40 million kids who aren't reading well enough, or we can focus on the 40 or 50 million that are reading pretty well and maybe could be doing better, but are doing okay. I think you can tell literacy as a positive story or as a negative story, I guess. And I really think that putting too much focus on the horror stories of illiteracy it does damage in its own right. The number of people in American society, the number of adults who don't have any literacy, who can't write their name, who can't read a word, is tiny. It's a tiny, tiny group. And so, you look and you go, gee, a few hundred years ago that wasn't true. There were many people who couldn't do that. My great-grandfather signed with an X. He didn't have any choice. There are very few people in this society who are in those straits now. So we've moved a lot. We just have to keep moving in that direction, it seems to me.
At the same time, people in the social context today living with disadvantage because of their proficiency.
When my great-grandfather was signing with an X, it didn't carry the same kind of shame. It didn't cut you off from participation to the extent that it does now. As larger, part of the problem that you're describing, it's a problem of wealth. It's a problem of moving literacy forward to a larger group of people. In a society that has very little literacy, being illiterate isn't an embarrassment. In a society that can rely on so much literacy for its massive architecture, for its incredible cultural inventions, for all the wonderful things that we're able to do. We send men and women to the bottom of the ocean. We send them all the way, into outer space. We can do these phenomenal things because of literacy. But what that means is that the literacy bar gets raised much higher than it used to be. You set that literacy bar maybe for a special group so that they can do certain things. And within a generation, within 2 generations, you see that there are all kinds of people who've risen to that level and want to take part in that society. Used to be maybe there'd be a dozen scribes in your society and they'd be the keeper of all the memories and all the records and they'd be the important ones. Well, now we're all scribes and, we want to go to the next level. We want to... Absolutely. But there are lots of them now, and we're all participating. And so now literacy doesn't belong to the princes and the scribes. It really belongs to not quite everybody. And it's that not quite everybody that is so niggling at all of us, that as soon as
Isn't that an understatement? Not quite everybody.
It depends, how you measure it. I mean,
in your own state, you talked about
Sure.
your daughter at a certain age where you said, well, when she crosses that line of independence,
yeah,
where reading has become so effortless,
Yep.
comparatively effortless, that her desire can drive her through
Absolutely.
whatever struggles remain, and she can pull herself into the world.
She can certainly do, if we can get her over that point, she can do a lot more on her own. She still needs teaching.
I understand.
If you want to get her to where she can get her law degree, if you want to get her to where she can, do things like read the Odyssey for enjoyment, she's going to need a heck of a lot more literacy than that, and that's going to mean giving her teaching and support all the way along the way. On the other hand, probably in her case, by the time she was in 3rd or 4th grade, She could do, with literacy, most of the basic things you'd want somebody to do in society. But she wouldn't be able to fully participate in the way that I'm talking, where she could actually not just be a passenger, but she could actually drive the car.
We say that's the goal.
That, to me, is the goal.
Just a small part of our population that's not there. It's most.
If we want everyone to get to that advanced level, and I really would, but I don't know that I'll see that in my lifetime.
The only reason they don't is because of how we're teaching. Then why wouldn't we want that?
It's something I want. It's something I work towards. It's something we're far enough away from that I doubt that I'll see that in my lifetime. I certainly won't see it in my professional lifetime.
Then the difference between here and there is a tragedy of our culture.
It is a tragedy of our culture, and it is one that I hope that we can at least help a larger portion of the population span, and certainly I hope I can make some small contribution to doing that. But I mean, honestly, the trick is moving everybody. The trick is taking that person who can't read the prescription and make sure they can read it, but then not saying, okay, that's good enough. It's never saying it's good enough is the real key here.
That's step one, that's great, but the light's this way.
Right.
Keep going.
But then, you can also take that kid who's proficient level at his high school and he's getting A's and B's and an occasional C, and he's probably going to be able to get into college and he can probably get a job with it, and saying, and that isn't good enough either. That this person could be leading the society, not just participating, that this person could be getting joy out of this, not just enjoyment, that this person could be...
They're not literally disabled.
Not at all.
Proficiency with reading or how they feel about it from doing whatever it is that's authentically in them to do.
Right, but they can't, they really can't take full advantage of what's available to them at this incredible buffet that we're at. That's the sad part for them. They're happy to be at the buffet. They just don't understand that there's a lot of stuff on there that they should be trying and that they could try if they knew how.
Yeah, and they're victims of the circumstances of their birth, disabling them.
Sure, and that's why I honestly, it's hard to talk about this aspect of it because it's not just a level of literacy that I hope that we can teach. It's a level of literacy I hope I can accomplish for myself. It's something that, you work on. It isn't even just a school thing. You're still building your vocabulary. You're still learning.
The beginning part. They don't have to
right.
feel good about
you got it.
Following through the inspiration.
Absolutely. And so, whether, the expansion of it is learning to read in another language, or whether it's learning to read things that are out of your background, out of your expertise. Gee, I normally only read computer science stuff. Novels kind of leave me cold. I'm not sure I could really read one well. Okay. Can you make that leap?
But in all cases, what we're saying is that the mechanism of the code and being able to comprehend through it, like you and I listen to one another.
It's all essential.
Is essential to the pathways.
You'll never get there without it. You've always got to go through the narrow part of that path. You don't have any choice, no matter what the language.
People that are talking, lots more to go. And your energy is really vibrant.
Thank you. That's good. I hope it wasn't moving too much.
You're smiling. You're laughing. You're excited. You have what feels to me kind of inspiration. And I'm back here behind the camera, and I'm going, what's at the heart? What's motivating this guy in this way to have a glow? As I said a while ago, when I said we're facing, and you explained well, we're facing this grimness. That's amazing. What is it?
I honestly believe in this stuff, and I honestly think, one, that we have made some headway with it. I don't believe that it's all gloom and doom, and I also think I have been some part of some of those small gains. I really do believe in this stuff, and I don't spend very many days not working on these. I work on a more diverse set of problems than most of the people in my field. I mean, I really do. When I came into it, I made a decision I was not going to be narrow in terms of focusing on a particular age level of kid. I mean, that's a real common thing. I only work with preschoolers, and that's my focus, and I'm an expert. And boy, we've gained from people doing that. But I had decided I was much more interested in the developmental continuum. I wanted to see how it changed. I wanted to see what we needed to do at different points. And so it allows me to dip into it at a certain point, work intensely on some problem, and then go and do something almost completely different. I mean, I can be giving court testimony one day. I can be doing an interview for media on another day. I might be counseling the president on another day. I might be teaching a class of new teachers another day. I might be out in a school working with a group of kids. I mean, I really get,
biking or running.
I get to do some things on my own too. I have, some diverse interests there too. But the point is, it means that if you start to get cold on something, that your understanding isn't there, that your success, maybe you don't see it anymore. You do habituate. You do get to where maybe things are good, but you can't see it. Being able to shift over and, gee, I'm not working with 3-year-olds, I'm working with 28-year-olds. It's hard to do that, but it's also, I think it wakes you up in some ways. It keeps you a little bit alive. It means that I almost never walk in here in the morning, not, knowing what's going to happen that day. And I think that matters. I think that's a good thing in your life. I used to worry about being bored. Now I worry about it if I'll ever get 2 days in a row that are the same, because it would be nice to have it once in a while. Maybe I'm getting old and tired. But I honestly believe in this stuff, and I do think that we're doing something so incredibly important that and what we do with it matters. It's why I don't like the debate stuff. It's so easy to say something that's rhetorically pleasing that will help you win the argument, but that ultimately doesn't move anything forward, and that isn't very satisfying. Whereas if I can go and work with 300 teachers in some school district and show them how to do something better, and you see that kids start to learn to read better in some measurable way, not just, oh, that felt good, but it's awfully hard not to be excited about what you do. When I went into Chicago, they told me there was no way anyone could go into that kind of a situation coming from, one, I'm not from Chicago. I didn't go through the Chicago schools. They don't want people from outside necessarily. It's a fairly insular community in that way. I was a university guy. I wasn't a school system guy. How could I possibly do this? Went in with really initially no budget, certainly no title, no staff. I mean, it was all just kind of makeup work. And in a year, stuff we did. I mean, we moved a lot of money and a lot of people and put in a lot of training, but they got the highest gains they'd ever had in achievement. I'm not talking narrowly across. This was not testing a particular grade level. This was 3rd through 12th grade. It was like the whole system. It was 3/4 of the schools improved. Not, oh, look, I targeted a school or two. The bottom 100 schools for the first time in history made gains equivalent to the gains the rest of the system made. So, it's easy to say, well, I'm just a person, I'm only a college professor, and there's only so much you can do. The fact is, you can do an awful lot if you're willing to study what you have to do, and if you're willing to keep focused on that thing, and if you're not willing to get distracted by all the silly stuff around it. And so, there are bad days. There are days when people are calling me names because I haven't taken a particular position or I've come out against or for something. But, you got to, I always tell myself, you have to toughen up, and that'll hurt your feelings. It does. But it's, the trick is to keep focused on what it is you're really trying to do, and to maybe when people are taking a shot at you, what is it that they're seeing that's a problem? Is it changeable? Is it something that you can get out of your way so that it won't block you from succeeding with this thing? And so even just learning how to talk about this is something that I work really hard at. Every time I do a media interview, I go back and I read it and I think about how that might have sounded better, or what I could have done that maybe would have made that clearer for the reporter so that he or she wouldn't have been confused by what I said, or wouldn't have been drawn by that silly quote, but maybe would have focused on the more important thing that I distracted them from through some colorful phrase. The trick is to put the colorful phrase where you want them to look. So there's just a ton of things to learn in this. But ultimately it comes down to, I've set a goal for myself of not retiring until reading achievement goes up in the United States. And so if I might have to work a long time if we don't do this well. So I'm pretty focused on that as a goal, and I see that as really pretty much my only professional goal. Everything else is just sort of ancillary to it. So I do think that if you have people who are doing something that they understand is important, they tend to be pretty excited about it and interested in it.
Focus, priorities.
Absolutely. And so I try to do that in everything that I do.